Being 6 o'clock, so this evening we do have scheduled a what will be a very brief liquor control meeting. So we're going to convene that meeting, and then we'll come back. And if you're here for something to do with City Council, we'll be back and opening up that meeting. Ask that everybody please take a moment to sign in the back. We appreciate that. Fine if you do it on your way out if you're already settled in. And there's also an agenda back there in case you're curious about what's going to be covered during tonight's meeting. So with that, we're going to call to order the City of Winooski Liquor Control Board meeting scheduled for 6 o'clock, and ask that everybody please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Deputy Mayor Nicole Mace.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, up tonight we have 2 restaurant-only approvals for 2018, one for Dover Tea located at 106 East Allen Street, and one from Namuna Asian Kitchen, also known as Fon Man, at 212 Main Street. Just turn to staff and see if there's been any issues with either license holders or license violations. Okay. Any questions or concerns from the Liquor Control Board? Nope. Any questions or concerns from the public in regards to these 2 restaurant licenses? Okay. So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of restaurant-only licenses for Dover Tea and we'll say Fon Man Kitchen.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Christine, second by Nicole. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. We also have on tonight's agenda item B, which is approval of catering permits. One for Champlain Mill Restaurant DBA Waterworks for Jazz Festival on the 1st and 2nd of June. And these are one time, we'll say, although they're a series, catering permits. And then also for the same entity, Waterworks, for Jazz Festival again on June 7th, 8th, and 9th. Any questions or concerns from the Liquor Control Board in regards to the catering permits? Any questions or concerns from the public in regard to these 2 catering permits? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the catering permits for Waterworks as presented on tonight's agenda.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Hal. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. That concludes tonight's business under the Liquor Control Board meeting. I'd entertain a motion for adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Nicole, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. The Liquor Control Board is hereby adjourned. We are warned for 6:05 for our regular City Council meeting, so we're going to take a minute breather here. On Monday, April the 2nd, 2018, we'll call to order the regularly scheduled City of Winooski City Council meeting. We'll ask that everybody again please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance, led once again by Deputy Mayor Nicole Mace.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so first up tonight is agenda review. This is an opportunity for us to review tonight's agenda. And we actually do have a correction we should note. Jesse, if you want to.
So on the agenda listed online, Roman numeral 6 was for one of the consent agenda items. So
We're just omitting that and moving from 5 consent agenda to 7 city updates and approving the Main Street loan agreements as part of the consent agenda.
Great, so clerical error on that, so there is a corrected one here available if anybody needs to notate that. But, so there will be 3 items for consideration on the consent agenda. Any other items that are concerns in regards to order questions? I think we've got everything stacked to accommodate a lot of our guests too. Okay, so seeing and hearing none from council, we'll move forward with the agenda as presented. First up tonight is public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the council about any items that are not on tonight's agenda, but that you would like to air out. We will get to the agenda items and discuss those in order, so appreciate you holding on those. But if there's anything that folks want to bring up that is not on the regular business, we'd be happy to hear that now. Feel free to interact during the meetings. We love to raise hands and questions. All right. So seeing and hearing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. We have 3 items on tonight's consent agenda. We have the City Council and Liquor Control minutes from March 19th, 2018. We have the warrants ending in 3/30/2018 and the payroll for period 3/11 through 24/2018 and subsequent payouts for January and February. And we also have the Main Street Revitalization Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund Loan Agreement for Preliminary Engineering and Drinking Water Loan Agreement for Preliminary Engineering. And so with that, that's one that we've opened up a number of times. So from a technical standpoint, thought that it could fit in there for now. It's of course contingent on other items this evening as well. Questions or concerns from council in regards to the consent agenda? Any questions or concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda as presented. Motion by Eric, second by Nicole. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. City update.
Great, thank you. Just a few updates tonight. I wanted to brief you on something the leadership team has been working on. Starting in January of this year, we've been focusing on some process improvements within the office, so doing some quality improvement processes that are going to lead to some how-tos of how you work through systems within how the public works through our systems. So those process improvements we're focusing on are the events and facilities reservation process, hiring and onboarding staff, the payroll process, which right now Angela is the only one in the city who knows how to do, so we're documenting that. And the water allocation fees and invoicing process. So those are 4 things that touch multiple people internally as well as the public. So right now we have finished the flow charting of those processes, are updating the forms. In May and June we'll be beta testing those processes with people who don't interact with them, and then rolling out some new how-to handouts for the public and for our internal stakeholders as well. So nothing you need to take action on, but our team's putting a lot of work into it, so I wanted to give them credit for doing it. As you all know, we lost our planning and zoning administrator last week, so the position is now, it's a really critical position for the city, so it's now posted through all of our regular posting channels. John Audie has graciously agreed to become the interim zoning administrator for the permitting side of that work. And then the master planning project management side of that work I'll be taking on with support from Heather and CCRPC and likely a consultant who will be coming back to you with more information about after we talk with the Planning Commission about it. Our hope right now is to keep the master plan process on track for wrapping that up in January. Other hiring updates, Angel Lane, our new assistant city clerk, starts on April 16th. We're very excited to have her, very excited to have her. She comes with a wealth of customer service experience, retired from FedEx as a customer service manager there, and is looking to kind of get back into the workforce. And then a couple of community services updates. There are a few community garden plots still available. That season kicks off April 27th. So if you're interested in a community garden plot, call the city or go on to MyRec. We had a really successful adult dodgeball tournament 2 months ago. So we are redoing that program, reissuing it. That will be April 26th. It was sold out last time around, so we hope more people get engaged this time. And then we have a newly developed Winooski trail crew that is convening. So if people are interested in thinking about how they assist with trail maintenance and upkeep in the city, I encourage you to reach out to Alicia Finley, our rec director, or go to winooskibt.org/volunteer. The first meeting of that group will be on Sunday, April 15th. That's what I've got. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Next up is council reports. I think we've started this way last time, so we'll swing back and go this way this time.
Sure. Last week I met with a few of the volunteers with Parents and Youth for Change who were involved with the transportation pilot project. And they were brainstorming to figure out how to get more volunteers involved as monitors on the bus. This is a service that runs from January and just completed last week and provided transportation for kids getting to Winooski Middle High School and the elementary school. So my suggestion was that they might consider meeting with Ray Coffey on the Community Service Commission to explore some other possibilities for bringing in volunteers. And also, I suggested it might be prudent to survey the bus drivers and to really understand the need for the monitors, which I think is the real pinch point for them of finding more people to commit at 7 in the morning to ride the buses. So I suggested they meet with Ray, and they're underway to set that up. But it sounds like it was a great year for the pilot. I went to a celebration event this past Saturday where a lot of the folks involved were really there celebrating a good year for that pilot. So that's what I have.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
I don't have anything.
So maybe an hour after sitting here and telling all of you that our legislative efforts around regional governance in the airport were dead, they very quickly lurched back to life, and we had a hearing last week on the potential of some state involvement around governance structures at Brooklyn International Airport. So we continue to support those conversations, and there's going to be a reconvening in the next week or so of a transportation committee on the Senate side to consider some potential action. It's probably late in the session for an actual bill to move forward, but we think that the involvement in and of itself is probably going to have some kind of positive inertia behind it, so that's good. We had a convening of the Housing Commission on Monday of last week, and great meeting. One of the recommendations we're talking about is also bringing on a liaison from the Planning Commission, in addition to just me being a liaison to the Housing Commission, to help ensure that that body stays abreast of all the work being done, because they're doing a lot of strategic thinking and discussions right now. So we're going to be really aggressive as some of those ideas start to formulate. They've really taken this concept that's behind us on housing to ensure a mix of quality affordable housing stock that maintains the character of our neighborhoods, and they're trying to put here's the actionable things that we can get to, and here's the things that we can benchmark, and it was a really exciting discussion. I think really is the beginning of real movement on some of those hard numbers and items that council gave a lot of feedback on last time that group was here. And then just following up that, Jesse and I have met with Mike O'Brien, chair of the Planning Commission, too, in regards to making sure we're doing the best we can to keep the strategic plan on track and on float. And we also just, you'll see in the Regional Planning Commission's minutes that they're taking up the climate change pledge concept. And we're going to look at if there's some basic ways the city can participate in that. We've had previous conversations about the fact that we want to make sure that if we're doing something like that, it's got some meaning behind it, and we're actually functionally doing something. And we all know how much bandwidth we have. That could be like a full-time 2 or 3 people. So more to come on that in the future. That's all I got.
So in my role as administrative liaison, met with Jesse last week. We talked about a number of the issues that are on the agenda tonight, and one that's not on the agenda, which is the interrelation between the education funding bill that has been approved by the House and the impact that that might have on TIF communities. So the House approved a bill that would that would lower the property taxes in most communities because it raises new revenue for education through an income tax surcharge. So if the definition of TIF is not attended to in that transition, it could mean a significant loss to communities that are TIF communities. So there's not much I can do about that, but I think I'm probably one of the few folks in the state that understands how it works. So I'm happy to explain further, although it's really not clear where that bill's going in the Senate. The Finance Committee is taking a lot of testimony. It hasn't sent signals yet about where they want to go, but that's certainly an issue that we need to be paying attention to in Winooski.
And just to follow up on that, we have rallied, and the league's done a good job of putting us on the alert screen of the other folks, and we are working on some kind of joint communication. Things are a little crazy right now with everybody in the legislature. There's 1,000 different issues hitting all these communities, so we haven't had tremendous response, to be really blunt, but we'll absolutely be filing formal on behalf of the city, concerned that they at least put in a hold harmless clause in that legislation. Because in the past, we've had issues with the legislature changing tax rules and not understanding the implications to the very delicately balanced and carefully balanced TIF districts and throwing them out of whack. So we're on it. Thank you.
Nothing to report from me.
Okay, thank you all. Okay, we'll move on to the regular items. First up tonight, we have consideration of Miss Jessica Bridge for the Housing Commission.
I'm just gonna get Miss Jessica Bridge.
She's here. She's here. More importantly, Will.
Yes, absolutely more important.
So we can only allow the person who's on the agenda to come up, not the extra person.
False. Please continue on up.
I'd be happy to hold it.
Okay, so with the recent election, Housing Commission lost a very valued member, Christine Lott. So we have an opening on Housing Commission, and we have one applicant for the position. That is Jessica Bridge, and she brings to the commission experience as both a realtor and a landlord in Winooski, and that hasn't been represented on the commission before. So I think she brings a perspective that really assists us, and also a wealth of resources to bring to the bear as well. So we recommend that City Council appoint Jessica Bridge to an alternate seat on the Housing Commission for a 2-year term. And here's Jessica to answer any questions about her background or interest in the commission.
Hi, Miss Bridge.
Hi.
So it's probably, it's funny because I don't think any of this group was around when you were president of the WCP.
No.
Downtown Winooski group, but came before the body a lot during that period. So you're re-engaging with community
Yes.
service.
Clearly have a lot more time on your hands.
What brings
This
you
is a
here?
slightly different time commitment, I think, than that was. Yeah.
What enthused you to come back?
So my profession makes, so I'm a real estate broker. I own a brokerage in downtown Burlington, specifically residential. But I have been a realtor for 12 years. I have a deep love for the city of Winooski. As a realtor, you get to see housing everywhere. And this is where I chose to purchase my first home, which was a duplex. And then I purchased another duplex here. And I still think I probably under rent them because I have wonderful tenants. And I think that, Winooski's hard to shake. Once you're involved, you just, it kind of gets into your blood and you need to come back. So the time commitment is different for the Housing Commission, and I know, Winooski Community Partnership is much further along than it was in the good old days. And so, yeah, I wanted to get back involved, but again, I know, he's sort of the star of the show, I'm just superfluous.
We actually don't usually ask questions, we just ask that so we could hang out.
Right. Yeah, he's hammy, so I'm sure he's enjoying every minute of it. Yeah, but I also, what Winooski is trying to do in being an affordable community is important. It's important work. And I do think that I have a good background of different diverse perspectives. And again, a really deep appreciation for what this community has been and is and where it's going. And I'd be happy to serve again. So.
Awesome. Other questions for Jessica?
Thanks for your interest.
Yeah, thanks for your support.
Appreciate your time and expertise in adding that to the table. That's awesome. Another high functioning commission. Any questions or concerns from the public? Commission selection process? Okay. So seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for appointment of Jessica Bridge to the Housing Commission.
Second.
Motion by Nicole, second by Hal. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Well done, Mr. William. Okay, item B, Discover Jazz Festival Winooski event permit application.
I'm going to invite Craig Mitchell as one of the event sponsors up. So we have received an event application to hold Discover Jazz Festival concerts in Rotary Park again for the first time this year. We've been doing kind of a gradual ramp up of Discover Jazz in Winooski. So we had events last year. You started for the first time the year prior at Waterworks.
Year 3.
Yeah. So this is year 3, but this is the first time we'll have events in Rotary Park. The proposed event will be free to the public and runs from June 1st through June 10th. Music in Rotary Park is proposed to run from 5 to 8 p.m. on Friday, the 1st of June, Saturday, the 2nd of June, Thursday, the 7th, Friday, the 8th, and then during the day on Saturday, the 9th. Additional jazz yoga in Rotary Park will be scheduled for Saturday, the 2nd, from 12 to 2 p.m. Staff have reviewed the event application at the March 21st event review meeting, and the conditions that were required by staff are included in your packet. Staff recommends approval for this event.
Awesome.
And I have Craig Mitchell here to answer questions.
Welcome, Craig. Exciting.
Very exciting. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, we appreciate the professionalism and experience that you guys bring to the table in terms of having a great track history of running events in the city. That obviously means a lot, and it's been a good relationship, so thanks for that. Anything else you want to add to the breakdown Heather gave?
And the one thing I will say is that the reason behind the Rotary choice is last year, being the first year that I spread out Jazz Fest into all the venues in Winooski. My sponsors paid for all those events that happened there. It still didn't feel like Jazz Fest. People driving around, people walking around, there was no energy. That is still the case this year, where all the venues will get free advertising, free entertainment, and will be as involved as they were the year before, except this year, on top of that, will be free shows in the park that are also paid for by sponsors. So literally it cost everyone nothing to enjoy Jazz Fest this year. And Burlington is sanctioning everything, from full page ads to radio ads, all of that. So we're part of Discover Jazz Festival, but we're different in the fact that we have our own sponsorships. And I'm doing something where I'm trying to make it as diverse as possible. So some of the proposed ideas will be using the Winooski High School Jazz Band as sort of a welcoming. And then a Cuban night, a Jamaican night, so to really embrace the diversity that's here in Winooski.
That's awesome. It's great. And people will learn that this side of the river is much cooler anyway.
Ain't that the truth?
So there'll be no reason to even go back to the other side. Love it. Thanks for all your questions for Craig in the application.
How many people do you anticipate participating?
You know, I would say the same number of folks that came to Winooski Wednesday, so in the Rotary, anywhere from 300 to 500 maybe.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's the goal, at least, hopefully.
Would you say that Winooski Wednesdays paved the way for this type
That
of
was the
event?
idea. That's where it came from. And I had a group of people, a lot of folks that were on sort of a committee of folks that I'd worked with last year, that was their suggestion. Like, how about we just try to focus on the Rotary next year? I mean, being that it works so well with Winooski Wednesday. So.
It's awesome to see the space activated and people use it. It's really exciting.
Same.
Other questions for Craig or Heather? Any questions or concerns from the public?
I'm interested in the definition of jazz yoga.
Jazz yoga, so that would be a live jazz guitarist,
Oh.
someone with a headset, and guiding people through the journey, but they're playing jazz guitar and guiding them through it. Last year I did it both at SXB and Laughing River, where I had jazz guitarists and horn players that would play softly while yoga was happening.
Fantastic.
So, and my goal is to have, at noon, a couple hundred people out there doing yoga. How beautiful is that going to be?
Yeah.
So,
Depends on how flexible you are.
I think I'm 10 years under my belt. I can do it today.
Great. Any other questions for Craig or for Heather? Okay, so seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the Discover Jazz Festival event permit.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Christine. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for all your work,
Thank
Craig.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up is Winooski Wednesday's event permit application, a very somewhat similar conversation.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Alicia Finley come up and join us. So this was a very popular event last year, and Alicia is looking to hold this again this year. We reviewed the Winooski Wednesdays are the concerts in Rotary Park held the first Wednesday of every month from June until October. This has been reviewed by staff at the March 21st event review meeting. I've given you the conditions that were required for this. It will run very similarly to last year's event, and I have Alicia up here to answer any questions you might have about that.
Awesome. Anything we learned last year that's going to be helpful this year?
It went pretty smooth last year. The crossing guards was really helpful, and so we're definitely bringing that back. But we figured out like the popular time, so we're trying to get more of downtown participation, the restaurants. So we're excited to see what that might look like. I have a meeting coming up, so I'm excited to make it a little more Winooski oriented again.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, a
Well,
Jazz Fest connection.
Yeah, we have a Jazz Fest connection. We're working with Craig again. So during the Jazz Fest week, our first one, June 6th, we have Sabo Yuma coming.
Nice.
So they were really awesome last year. Yeah, so we're excited for that again. Yeah, we have everything. We have all of our bands booked, so we're ready to go.
Great. Well, we appreciate all the work that went into this last year as a
Yeah.
kind of pilot, and way to go and doing it well enough that we're back here again feeling good about seeing it and supporting it. So that's awesome. Questions, concerns from council? Any questions or concerns from the public?
I guess I have just one. I mean, I've seen, it's not unusual for events like this to grow in popularity. I'm thinking of Somerville, down at the Intervale, sort of started small and then quickly became. So I'm just wondering what thoughts you have about the potential for crowds that outgrow that space. Is that, I don't know how close we came to that at all last year, or?
Last year we had roughly anywhere from, and it's depended on the weather, of
Right.
course, anywhere from 200 to 350 people. So my thoughts, I would love to see something like that happen, and of course that space wouldn't really be ideal.
Right.
But we never know what potential we have with other areas, in the city, Cassavant maybe one day. So there's definitely potential, I think, for things like that. But right now, I think we're still trying to keep it kind of where it's at until we really hone in on it. And yeah, I want to make sure that it's Winooski ran, and so Winooski businesses, so not trying to bring out people from everywhere else.
Right.
So.
I
Do we
think
know
the
how many
space,
people can fit? Yeah.
I think it's 750 or so
Okay.
at the moment, so it would have
We have some
to
room to
double.
grow.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
got room.
I think we're good right now.
That can happen quickly.
Totally.
We are actively encouraging somebody to do a test run in Cassian at some juncture, just from a conversation standpoint. That's something that would stop by here before it actually happened, but we're encouraging that somebody try something in the hundreds, versus, it's been talked about, that place will hold a couple thousand. It's
Right.
like, it'd be nice to see a couple hundred first and see how that goes too.
Definitely.
Yeah. Other questions, concerns from council? Any subsequent questions from the public? Okay, so seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the Winooski Wednesdays event permit application.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Christine. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Item D, approval of Winooski Wiffle Classic.
All right, I'm going to call Lou DeMasi, the event sponsor, up. Staff has received an application to hold the second annual Winooski Wiffle Classic on May 19th at Cassavant Meadow, as opposed to at Landry Park where we had it last year. Staff reviewed the application at the February 21st event review meeting, and once again, as I had mentioned in my previous event presentations, we discussed the fact that the event will coincide with the Winooski Public Safety Day on Winooski Falls Way, but believe that the two will be mutually reinforcing with foot traffic between the two serving to cross-promote the events. Conditions that we've required are included in your packet, and staff recommends approval for this event. So here's our opportunity to test out something in the hundreds at Cassavant Meadow. And Lou DeMasi here is here to answer any questions.
Awesome. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Excited to do another whirl.
Yeah, I'd say this is kind of 1B, if you will, where we had to move it last year to Landry. I think we're going to keep it as small. We had 16 teams last year. I think we'll cut it to 24 this year, which shouldn't be a problem, but kind of a first event, if you will, being down there. And I think it's the event space is perfect for it. And I think it's, as soon as the public is kind of educated on it, I didn't know anything about it. I think it could be a really cool event space in the future.
That's great. And you guys have quite a bit of experience. I mean, you pulled the one off last year, obviously, but
yeah, I run the Pond Hockey Classic, the Oktoberfest on the waterfront. We're opening up another one in Portland, Maine, and so this is and 100% of the proceeds from this event will go to the Flying Ryan Foundation, and we'll be Long Trail is going to be a big sponsor this year, and I think they'll be part of getting the permit for the alcohol. We've already met with DLC. They approved the site map, and it'll be turnkey from the same event at Landry.
it's great.
Yeah.
It was last year, I remember in your run-up, it was awesome to see all the event experience. Again, to see somebody with a little knowledge of that industry and that work to try a space that hasn't been used a ton for events out is great for us. That's awesome.
That was our plan last year, but moving it to Landry actually turned into a mud pit, and that was nice and dry down there. But I think we're looking pretty good this year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks again for re-engaging it. Exciting.
Great. Thank you.
Questions, concerns from council for Lou or for Heather? Any questions or concerns from the public? Get your wiffle practice on. Ron?
I'll speak as chair of the Community Services Commission. We have a responsibility to pay attention to Cassavant among the other parks. So I would ask how you would try to prevent or ameliorate any damage to the ecological system that's there, which in some areas is kind of fragile.
Sure. Yeah, we're only going to allow access on the path into the park, and then the entire area will be double fenced, so people can't go in and out, and for the alcohol reasons, but that'll also keep people out of the woods.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure.
That's a great general question that we're dealing with that space as a use, so great question. Any other questions, concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I would entertain motion for approval of the application for the Winooski Wiffle Classic event.
So moved.
Motion by Eric, second by Nicole. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for bringing the event back. All right, item E, capital reserve allocation, motorcycle purchase.
So I am here to talk about this, and Angela is my backup. The chief has been pulled away tonight, so he will not be here for this discussion. This is a pretty self-explanatory request. As you may know, in the capital improvement budget, we have a vehicle reserve fund specifically for the replacement of police vehicles. So this is a request to use $13,500 of those reserves to purchase the police department motorcycle that we've been leasing through a JAG grant for the last 3 years. So 3 years ago, we got JAG funding to start up that motorcycle fleet program and put all the equipment on it we needed. Now that the lease is expiring, we have the option to purchase it for $13,500, and we are requesting use of allocation to do that. We found that that having an officer on a motorcycle is incredibly useful for traffic enforcement and for community policing, and here's the chief. So I think it's a worthwhile investment to continue in the police department fleet.
Jesse was just telling us how you like to drive real fast up and down the street on the motorcycle.
Probably why he's here on time.
Sorry, I'm just coming in at the tail end of the conversation.
No, I mean, I think that's great. I'll turn, I mean, it sounds like it's been an effective tool and one that's been beneficial from a urban standpoint. I mean, that was the argument made when we first signed up for the lease, was that it would give you some dexterity to get in and out of places that the cruisers don't normally fit, and do some things with traffic control that give you some flexibility. So it sounds like it's achieved those goals.
It has. It's been a really useful tool, and one of the things I stressed during the budget process was that I'm trying to find alternative ways to keep people engaged and have some alternative ways to patrol that doesn't take from the patrol division. So it also helps with that.
Great.
I think it's also just important to note that we find it to be a really effective community policing tool. When often officers don't like to be too far away from a vehicle when we only have 2 officers on board and want to back up each other across the city. But an officer on a bike you can have a conversation with someone on the street the way an officer in an Explorer can't. So it helps to that extent as well. Plus kids love them.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Ask for clarification on the connection between the motorcycle and community outreach. So thank you.
Other questions for Chief Hebert or Jesse on this? Great. Any questions, concerns from the public? Okay. So seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval of the allocation of the capital reserve for a police motor vehicle purchase, and that's for the motorcycle.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Hal. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good job, Chief.
Appreciate it. All right, item F, Main Street revitalization, presentation on updated information.
So I'm going to ask John, our Public Works Director, and Ryan to come up. Yep. And give you a little intro here and then turn it over to them. You're going to have to turn the thing on too. So there are a number of agenda items here related to the Main Street Revitalization Project. We are here tonight to present some follow-up information as requested. You're going to have to open the front thing too. Follow-up information as requested at the last meeting and outline the next steps if you so choose to move it forward tonight. So just as a reminder from a big picture standpoint, a yes vote tonight, if you decide to move this project forward in its entirety, that would bring this question to the voters of whether we could move forward with applying for a financing package to do this project. As you might remember from last week's meeting, we will not be able to get the full commitment from our potential funding sources without a bond vote. So this yes vote says to the community, give us authority to stay at the table, keep having these conversations, explore this as an option, and then give the council the authority in the summer when we bring you back that full financing model to decide whether to move the project forward or not. So a yes vote does not mean we're automatically doing the project. It just enables us to put together a financing package for you. The project in itself, as you may remember, is the full street reconstruction for the mile of Main Street from the railroad bridge up to exit 16. It's been designed in the community's vision that the community articulated as part of the form-based code process, the Winooski Quarters study, and the master planning process. It would allow us to address some necessary and inevitable infrastructure needs that the city has in our water and wastewater system, and do that in a way to leverage non-city dollars, so state and federal funds that would subsidize any local dollars assigned. And of course, it would also let us maximize the development potential of Main Street. As outlined in your packet on the agenda, all the agenda items, the next steps, if you so choose to move this forward, you would need to approve a necessity and reimbursement bond resolution saying that it's necessary to move forward with this vote. You'd need to approve the bond warning for a special meeting. You would need to authorize us to apply for the grants and loans that we've thus far identified, and authorize me to execute those grant and loan documents, and also provide us any direction on revenue streams. You'll hear from John that we've been able to identify some revenue streams that could offset the tax impact. So we need your feedback on which of those you want to hear more about in the next couple of months. In the last 2 weeks since our last meeting, we've done a couple of things. We've refined the cost estimate a bit. We've looked at a scaled approach that's outlined in your memo to do it in different segments linearly. We have modeled some funding potentials. So what are those different revenue streams and how could we offset the cost incurred? We met with bond counsel, our lawyers who guide us on bond votes, met with the municipal bond bank, and talked to the funders. Just as in an overall sense, and then I'll turn it over to John to answer your specific questions about the information outlined in your memo. This would be a $23 million project bond vote. We would endeavor to bring back a full financing model to you by the end of the summer. And we believe we have pathways to the project that would get this done within about a 2.5% increase to utility rates and property tax rates using new revenue streams. And you have a lot of information outlined in your memo. So I'll turn it over to John to answer any questions, and Ryan to answer any questions you might have. They've really done the yeoman's amount of the work here. If you have any questions about the information as outlined.
Sure. Yeah, and so if it helps, what I can do is kind of hit the highlights of the memo that was presented to you all, if that works. Okay. All right, so this is an updated cost estimate since the last time you all saw it on March 19th. So the revised total cost is $22,300,000. Previously, it was $23,700,000. The update was due to some additional information we received from GMP regarding utility connection costs. So we're coming back about $1.4 million less than the last time you saw this. So as Jesse mentioned, what we did was we looked at kind of a scaled or phased approach for potentially going at different sections of street. So we looked at what the cost would be if you went to Spring Street, what the cost would be if you went to La Fountain and Teigen, and that would be a doable option to phase this project. So respectively, Spring Street, the total cost would be roughly $3.5 million, and that's mainly due, the reduced cost is mainly due to this utility undergrounding. That work's already been done up to Spring Street. Well, I shouldn't say done, it's behind some of the properties, so it's not required for that phase. If the project was implemented to La Fountain Street, this is sort of the retail section of the project. That cost would be around $8.3 million total. And then if it were to extend to Teigen Street, the total cost would be close to the full amount of $19 million. Along with those options, there are other phasing alternatives. So you could progress just the water resources piece. So if you wanted to stay just within the curb lines and kind of maximize the grant funding, that's potential phasing option. So you could just do water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater pieces. We didn't cost those out, but it would be less than these options shown. Alternatively, we looked at potential value engineering options. So one thing that does jump out is we're currently cost estimating this $1.4 million Silvacell system, which is, it's an underground tree root system. It provides sort of a healthy tree root option. It looks like milk cartons, basically. It gives the roots ability to breathe and provides some stormwater retention ability too. So that would be something we could look at for value engineering and use a structural soil in lieu of that. There's some other projects that have used both that we would kind of use that as a benchmark. So those are kind of the scope options we've looked at. And then we start getting into the modeling. I think what I'll do is I'll just skip right to the layouts for each fund. So as Jesse mentioned, what we're looking at, so this would be the water fund. So the total water fund project is $2.1 million. And we've modeled it using an SRF loan, which would be a -3% interest rate at 30 years. So based on that, the annual debt service starting at the end of construction would be around $24,000. So modeling that against our revenues coming in, we use the baseline of 2018 and revise the water rates to meet that expense line. So we're looking at potentially around roughly around 2.5% increase to make up this debt service amount. Along with that, we're also looking at, we're assuming an allocation fee increase of $10,000, which is pretty conservative. We're using existing developments that have already occurred on Main Street. So I think one of the recent developments was around $8,000 and the other was $18,000. So we use kind of an average for those allocation fees. And we're also using potentially capital reserve funding to buy down the project, $150,000. Which would still give us roughly just under $500,000 in the reserve fund. The other thing to point out would be we're still looking at allocating funding for future capital expenses, so water main replacements and our typical capital funding options. So going to our sewer fund. Sewer fund total project cost would be around $6.25 million, and that includes sanitary and stormwater costs. So we modeled this using a USDA grant at 3.125 interest rate, 30 years, and it also includes a 30% grant option on that. So that debt comes out to be around $146,000. So very similar to the water fund, our goal is to try to maintain an interest rate of less than, right in that 2% range. And we used a $250,000 out of the capital reserve fund to help sort of buy down that project. Again, we modeled out allocation fees based on historic developments. $20,000 was our amount for that. Yeah, correct. So along with looking at these rates as a gut check, we also looked at surrounding communities to make sure that any potential rate increases were feasible for residents. And so, for example, our sewer rate funding. So right now our rate is $48.57 per 1,000 cubic feet. And if you go out to 2028, we're looking at an increase of $59.10. So looking at other sewer rate users, the average rate for surrounding communities are around $48.57. Or sorry, $64.48 for other municipalities. And some of those municipalities actually have a separate stormwater rate structure that go along with that. So what we're looking at is we're significantly lower than a lot of the existing users. And that holds true for the water rate side as well. So jumping to the general fund. So general fund, the total project cost bear with me as my zoom in works. The total project cost for the general fund is approximately $15.2 million. So that includes streetscape, underground and utilities, and some allocation from water and sewer for the roadway work. We are looking at potentially using just a bond, a 3.8% bond to perform that work. And based on the 3.8% 30-year bond, the interest rate only annual debt would be around $443,000. The total principal and interest rate would be around $157,000. So we looked at what potential offsets could be used to for that debt schedule. So what we're looking at here is potentially a local options tax at $150,000, a grand list set aside. So the projected grand list that would occur with the Main Street development, if we could set aside a portion of that to help buy down the debt. We looked at TIF funding, future debt service expiration, which happens in 2025, and impact fees for utility undergrounding, transportation, and potentially duct bank franchise fees for those private utilities. So using all those potential offsets, we can get to a tax rate of approximately 2.2% above projected 2020 tax rate. And then what we'd be looking to do is pay interest rate only until that TIF expiration occurs in 2025. So that's sort of a high-level overview of the funding modeling for each water, sewer, and general fund piece.
Can you explain the local option tax, please?
Yes. Yeah.
So in Vermont, municipalities have the option to implement a local options tax. You can do it for rooms, meals, and alcohol tax or sales tax. We are recommending this $150,000 would be the 1% for rooms, meals, and alcohol tax. Sales tax doesn't have a huge impact here because we don't have a whole lot of retail. We are the only community, we are in a donut hole, so all the surrounding communities around us have implemented this local options tax and we have not. So we are not currently, we would not be losing any strategic advantage to implement it here. The $150,000 is based directly from our current receipts. So currently, if we had, based on last year's last year's collection, or rooms, meals, and alcohol receipts to the state, if we had applied this 1% tax, we would have collected about $157,000 based solely on the establishments that are currently here. So that's what it is. We do have the right within our charter to implement it. It would need to go. We would need to take further action if we were going to implement it for next year. We likely would not implement it for FY19. We would implement it as part of the FY20 budget process.
Thank you.
From a general perspective, that wasn't passed by a large margin, but it was passed by the voters previously in a year where I think our budget got about a maybe 53 to 54% approval rating, so it was not a watershed year when it came to that. I was gonna say it was done in a way that there still needs to be another action taken. It wasn't done technically correct when it was initially done. The 1%. The other thing that I know I actively sold to the business community was when we are having that discussion, we were also in the process of implementing paid parking. And the discussion was to try to give the business community a chance to see that paid parking was not going to turn Winooski into a ghost town. It's not. And then have that conversation again about the 1% sales tax.
That reminds me of something else. If we did this revitalization of Main Street, would we also be extending the paid parking area?
That would be a conversation we would need to have. From a parking theory perspective, one of the reasons you have parking is to turn over parking. So as the area that John mentioned, that's the commercial stretch of Main Street, I think there could be an argument to be made there if there were more restaurants there, more establishments that didn't want people to come and park for the day but wanted those spaces to turn over. There would be an argument to do that. We have not assumed that in any of our modeling. So it would really be a decision of, is that the right thing to do to ensure the vibrancy of the stretch of road? At a future time, we're not counting on that revenue for this project.
Could you also talk, just because I think they're not really explained here, kind of how the numbers were arrived out on impact fees for utility undergrounding and impact fees for transportation, what those just generally are?
Yeah, sure. So the utility fees for undergrounding, what we'd be looking to do is that 6.5 million, that's the current cost estimate for utility undergrounding, is distribute that as development occurred along Main Street. So what we try to do is limit that cost being distributed to taxpayers and limit it to the folks that are actually seeing the improvements. And that may be able to hopefully get bought down if we can negotiate with those utility providers, either through franchise or cost sharing, potentially get that number down to promote development and not have to even put that much cost on the developer. The transportation impact fees, that is similar to, we looked at surrounding municipalities. They also have a transportation impact fees. And what that is as you do these capital improvements, there's more stress on those new infrastructure pieces. So, impacts to new pavement, we distribute that out as well.
And that would be to new projects. So it is reliant on new construction, and the estimates on those were built using our best estimates on what properties would go.
The undergrounding, yes. The transportation impact fees, we basically took an average of other municipalities around here, so those need some more work.
Okay.
And I mean, it's $2,000 annually right now, so it's a pretty small percentage of the debt service offset.
Sure. I think it's an important point to make that we're not at the place and part where we can probably pick the revenue streams apart in extreme detail and get to this 1,000% acceptance, because that's not possible, right? Nor is it feasible for you guys to have done that work, or would have been reasonable to have you do that work at this point in time. I mean, some of this is just math based off of TIF projections, etc. But
Well, and we were trying to respond to the request at the last meeting to put together some models of what this could look like, and what options could be, and give you a sense of what that menu is going to be. So if we decide to move this forward over the next 4 months, we know the ones to really dig into to bring you ordinance changes or impact fee proposals or those kinds of things. As you say, this is not presented to you of this is how we're going to fund it. We're trying to give you a model of how it could be funded.
Can we put on a list somewhere? And I'm sorry, this is somewhat random. We haven't done a water wastewater capacity review for council in a little while. If we could do that in the coming meetings, that would be great, just to give everybody an idea of where we're at with that. Past councils have dealt with that a lot, so.
Yes.
I have some questions about water and sewer rates. So, my experience has been that the rates have not been increased over the last few years, and I think it's reflected in some of these charts. So the rates for both water and sewer have been relatively stable for our ratepayers in the community. And what this modeling shows is an annual increase in the neighborhood of 2% for both water and sewer. So that's, I'm reading that right.
Yeah, 2012, I think, was the last time.
2012 was the last time water and sewer rates. And so what this modeling is showing, we're moving from 6 years of flat rates to annual increases around 2%. And that is just to fund this project. So I know we've also done some work on asset mapping. And so I'm wondering what other projects we can foresee coming down the pipeline, so to speak, in terms of work to be done on our water and sewer infrastructure. So that's question number one. And question number two is, I know that there are wastewater and stormwater rules I don't know what the status of those are, but as a result of I believe an attempt to clean up Lake Champlain, there's all sorts of new regulatory requirements for municipalities around wastewater and stormwater. So I'm wondering what potential impact those rules might have in terms of, so big picture, this is a 2% increase on an annual basis just for this project. What other infrastructure projects do we see in the next 5 to 10 years, either because we have aging infrastructure that we've identified through our asset mapping system, or because these new rules are coming down?
So I'll start and let them jump in. So I want to be clear that while you're right, these rate increases don't anticipate other significant projects. One of the things we were very careful in doing with this modeling was not touching our current capital allocation or debt service. So this anticipates full allocation out in future years to the amount we've been budgeting for capital, for preventive maintenance and capital improvements, as well as it does not pull existing debt service into this model. Mm-hmm. So it's not, so we're not assuming we won't do any other projects. We are assuming we will continue to do the preventative maintenance at the rate we've been doing, mm-hmm. and do this project. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's a good question whether that's enough, or whether we'll be able to, whether we'll need to come back with additional asks. Mm-hmm.
In addition, the projections on here for revenue are solely based on the current consumption of water, and as properties get developed, we will have additional consumption that will also increase the revenues, and that could be put towards infrastructure projects. Mm-hmm.
Angela, you are welcome to just pull up a chair and sit with us if you like. As you probably can guess, her fingerprints are all over this work. So, anything else on
just that? So one of the things, as I've been here only a few months, that's going to be one of my main tasks, is getting into the CIP and pulling out that asset management data and sort of prioritizing what work needs to happen, and putting some real budget numbers to it. So, I mean, I will say Main Street is, that's 100-year-old pipe. So doing that work now is, it's needed. So it would be on the list anyway. With Lake Champlain, the phosphorus limits, they're coming up now. So one of our utility manager is looking to try to address that kind of not at the end of the pipe, but more on our operations side at this point. So we're looking at leaf litter pickup and trying to quantify how much phosphorus we're removing based on just our operations side, and our goal is to not turn it into a large, expensive capital project at our treatment plant with filtration and all the heavy expenses, but deal with it upstream where the costs aren't as severe.
And just one last question, thank you. this modeling also has us, I just wanna make sure I'm reading this the right way. I'm looking at sewer fund reserves, going from $1.7 million in reserves to $658,000. That's a pretty substantial decrease. I believe some of it is for the Headworks project that we approved. So $700,000 of that is for the project that we just approved, but there's some other, looks like $250,000 for this project. So just, again, thinking long-term, is that the right level of reserves, given some of the other infrastructure needs we may be looking at?
Yeah, and Angela and I have worked on this a bit. So that a lot of that funding is funding that's been carried forward, assuming there's a capital project, but it hasn't been funded. So it's just keeps carrying over. So now we're actually looking at, we've got a pretty healthy fund balance. Can we invest some of that money and get some return on it? So that's something we're looking at is what is a feasible reserve balance, a comfortable reserve balance that we should have. So I'm sure we'll have more discussions on that piece. But that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a pretty safe reserve number at this point.
Right now, that's pretty high for capital reserves, and a lot of the usage that you're seeing is from John Cho coming on to staff and addressing a lot of deferred capital maintenance down at the plant. So he's only been here a few years. He's really ramping up on getting some of those things completed that have been pending, and we're sitting in that reserve bank.
Thanks. But I do think it's important to note that when we're, for the sewer fund specifically, when we're looking at a total operating budget around $1.2 million annually, and we have a reserve balance that will maintain over time of over $600,000, that's more than 50% of our budget set aside in our reserves, which is significantly more than we carry in most funds. So instead of letting it sit there, is there a way we buy down debt to defer interest costs later? That was our concept here of kind of capital optimization. How do we use that money we have now to buy down future interest costs?
Yeah, the only required reserve, which was approved by council in the fund balance policy, is 45 days cash on hand.
Given that the water and sewer infrastructure is pretty old and aged out, any concern with running into any surprises in the project that could cause cost overrun? And if so, what kind of contingency are you looking at to offset that?
Yeah, so that's always a concern with underground projects. So we are carrying a pretty healthy contingency on this project. I believe we have at least 10% on every single line. Plus our estimates are, I would say, are conservative at this point because there are a lot of unknowns. We have identified funding for any potential contamination that may pop up as we go through with the project, and our consultant VHB has done some pretty extensive underground sampling. So we have identified sort of the typical unknowns as far as like contamination concerns. That's always a huge cost issue as you get into a project. But I think the current estimate, I would say the current estimate is pretty conservative in that regard.
Okay.
Questions for John, Ryan, and Jesse on technical specs? I want to make sure, it's kind of how this conversation, because this is on for approval tonight, this is a chance to kind of ask questions about the content that's been presented to us, and then we're going to turn back towards some discussion as we lead towards opening decision. Want to make sure we get any of those kind of technical questions out. I think the path that's been laid out would be, again, this approval would authorize staff to go forward with putting together a ballot initiative. I think there's a really key factor here that nobody needs to buy into the funding values that are presented here. That's not a conversation we've had. We just merely asked for what would a project, a potential package look like from a long-term perspective. So I think this is the first crack at that, where there hasn't really been a lot of input back saying, well, we think we should retain a little bit more for operational growth on the TIF side of things, et cetera. So I think that's a key conversation that's going to unfold should the next step be taken, but it gives you an idea of what it might look like at least. Yeah, please.
So the TIF modeling, and forgive me if I don't have this exactly right, but does this funding modeling assume full build out of the TIF is accomplished before FY25?
No. So currently, an important point to note, and Angela, why don't you come sit with us? So a couple of important points to note on the TIF district. The TIF is carrying, in general terms, the TIF is carrying 3 different types of debt. We have a note, the primary municipal TIF bond that we talk about is the TD Bank note. We then have a note to PCOR and a note to ourselves, or a note to the Winooski Community Development Corporation that's to ourselves. The one we have to expire by 2024 to successfully complete the TIF is the TD Bank note. If nothing else happens for the life of the TIF, we successfully pay off that note. We can pay for it entirely right now solely by the property tax increment, not by the pilot payments coming in, not by the ground leases coming in, solely with increment. So that, unless we have some devastating fire or something that really reduces our increment, we will successfully wrap that up. So the 39 to 40% that you see projected here, about the $500,000 set aside, as you see on the general fund spreadsheet, you see a reference schedule at the bottom. Mm-hmm. Those are all the different revenue streams coming out of the TIF district when it retires. You'll see that balance in 2025 is about 1.2 million. Mm-hmm. That's assuming that we are able to pay out the PCOR and the debt to ourselves. Having said that, even if I did some rough back of the envelope calculations, if we're only able to pay off a portion of that PCOR note and the note to ourselves and fully pay off the TD debt, there are still models that allow us to achieve this model, achieve the continual pay down of that debt over 5 years, so extend that debt to 2029 and still have $300,000 or $400,000 returning to the general fund at that $500,000 level to Main Street, at the debt to PCOR in the city, with still returning new revenues to the general fund. And again, as we move forward, if we decide to move this project forward and move forward in the next couple of months, I think those are projections we would want to unpack as a team together and look at those models.
And that number is not net of expenses, that's gross, is that correct?
That is correct.
Because the TIF is currently, people need to understand, the TIF is currently handling expenses. There are portions of people that are being paid for out of the TIF.
There are no people paid for by the TIF.
Well, but accounting time and things like that.
We do a general fund transfer. The only people who have a portion of their salary reimbursed is the detective from the police department.
Okay.
But then I think the point the mayor is making is the note to us, the CDC note, is paying for humans that would have to come on to the general fund.
Yes.
So just so I'm reading this right, this modeling projects $505,000 in change in revenue. The 1.2, is that coming out of the 1.2, or is that 1.2 on top of the?
No. So the below the blue line there, that 1.2 is reference only. We just wanted you to see all the different revenue streams coming out of the TIF district. Right. It's not solely our point is it's not solely property tax. So when the TIF district expires, we will continue to have those additional revenue streams that we can call upon. So the total in 2025, if all goes well, the total return to the taxpayers is 1.3 million. And we're suggesting take $500,000 of that out and dedicate it to this project with this particular model. this model could change.
But your statement earlier, where even if we don't pay off the P-Corps note and the note to ourselves, we're looking at $300,000.
Right. So if we decide, if there are
That's
there are
$300,000
stacks
after
of
the
ifs here.
Yeah.
If we see no new development in the TIF district, which I don't believe is going to happen, but if we were to see no new development in the TIF district, and we were to negotiate with ourselves and P-Corps to stretch out those debt payments, then that 1.2 million return would go, these are rough estimates, $500,000 to Main Street, 300,000 or 400,000 to pay off that extended debt, and then 300,000 or 400,000 back to the general fund.
Thank you.
And not to attach values to it, but when we say the P-Corps note, so people understand what that means, the P-Corps family in the course of the TIF being created in construction and as a bailout on one of the buildings, we were short on debt capacity, and a personal loan was given to the city by the P-Corps family. The family was very generous in terms of the repayment terms and have been so for the entirety of the loan, and we have been successful in renegotiating it when needed and necessary. The most recent renegotiation resulted in terms that we were trying to be pretty aggressive in getting it paid back. That's a conversation that can always be had. The second point is the CDC note. Again, the Community Development Corporation was an entity stood up to help with the financing and construction of the financial deal downtown. When it folded, it left a debt to the city and transferred to the city. We are actually, this body comprises the functioning board of the Winooski Community Development Corporation. And as such, you can convene as that body at any point in time and do whatever you wish with the debt that the city owns. You can forgive it, you can negotiate particular terms of repayment or whatever that may be. The vision of that money, that repayment, was that the city at one point in time, or at the completion of the TIF, would end up with $1 million in the bank to help with economic development or whatever it is that we want to do. And in the wisdom of the people who put the TIF together from a financial perspective, they put it in it was an opportunity seized upon that created a potential windfall for the city. You could argue that's maybe a luxury. We've treated it like a luxury because we've tapped the repayment money for it a couple years in a row to try to invest in economic development. So just for a context perspective, as we dive deeper into revenues, there's a first little glimpse at that. Have I lied in any way, Angela? What else? Before we talk about what people think of this, I want to open it up at this point too to see if the public's got questions and if there are other technical questions. I really want to hammer those out. Just from a phasing model perspective, I mean, I appreciate, I can think of lots of other pros and cons to put on this list, but I appreciate that. But was this a natural phasing, or was this kind of a forced thinking on phasing? And then just out of curiosity, for actual construction, is this probably something similar that we would see in terms of the phasing from a construction standpoint, or is it a strip one side, do one side?
No, it's a corridor project, so you could, phasing it to a terminus of an intersection is feasible. I mean, they may even, as construction, if the project does become a construction project, I was going to say they may phase it in such a way, but they probably wouldn't, because you'd go through and you'd mill the entire street and you'd demo the sidewalks. There may be some phasing, but no, there isn't. It wasn't a forced thinking. The project could be performed that way. I mean, obviously there's additional costs involved if the plan is to complete that corridor, because you're remobilizing contractors. If you can utilize interest rates that are out there now, that's more optimal. There's economies of scale for a project like this.
Right. I mean, the cost would be totally unpredictable from that standpoint. There would be no. I mean, as soon as you accepted one phase of it, the other phase projections would be useless in terms of their dollar value.
Yeah.
from an increase in cost perspective, increase in debt, the potential that there might not even be some of the programming around that's being utilized. Okay.
Yep.
Just want to point that out, that there wasn't that wasn't necessarily a natural thing where it's like, this really makes sense. It was an attempt to show this is a possibility if you wanted to limit or chunk it in some way. Okay. And that's preferable to overdoing layers of the project as a whole, right? In other words, I don't know, how would you even go about doing that? But if, let's say we wanted to do, as we've done maybe in the past sometimes, which is just do surface work, it obviously would not make sense to do that and then come back a few years later and dig that up to do the other portions and pieces of it. I know that's probably obvious to everybody, but bears stating aloud.
Yeah, we tried to sort of think through if we could piece it out, and one thing I mentioned, we could do maybe the water sewer work, but if you do the sidewalk work and the utility work, you're gonna get into the street at some point and start tearing up new pavement somehow, so it doesn't really
Makes sense.
lend itself yet.
Yeah.
Is it possible that just the utilities would run all the way, and maybe the streetscaping only goes to a certain phase?
Yeah, I mean, you could do it a la carte like that, but you would run into some coordination issues, like we're saying, potentially.
Any items from council before I just turn it over to the public, see if there's any questions? Okay, so seeing you know, we want to open it up. This won't be the last time for public comment on this item before we take a vote, but I want to open it up because there's been a lot of technical information, a lot of financial information flying around, so I want to see if folks have any questions they want to ask to add into that conversation, or if you have something you'd like to say, that's okay too. It doesn't necessarily need to be a question. Yes.
As a property owner here in Winooski, I think about cost versus benefits. And it seems to me that long-reaching benefits should accrue, especially when you look at the lessening of the need for servicing of the underground facility that's installed. So looking out, say, 50 years, that should represent a savings to the city overall. Would that be reasonable?
Yeah, there would be some operation savings. You know, if there's a water main break, obviously there's a cost savings there, or sewer cleaning maintenance, there's savings there. So and roadway work, you know, filling potholes, those kind of operation costs. Putting a number on that's a little more difficult. If we knew when water mains would break, that would be very helpful, but we don't, unfortunately. But yes, there definitely would be some savings.
But with new infrastructure, water mains and sewer mains, that's less likely to occur, except under really harsh winter conditions where the freeze goes down really deep.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Ron's question does bear an interesting side question, which is, we say a lot today, they don't build it like you used to. Is there an estimated economic useful life term on water piping today that's, I mean, this might be as much of a asset degradation from a discounting perspective, but.
So for example, if you take the water pipe that's currently in the ground, there's a mix of cast iron, ductile iron. One thing that for this project, we are estimating a ductile iron pipe, which has a significant life span, say 100 years. So we're basically using, instead of say a less, well, PVC pipe or a plastic pipe, we are looking to use a ductile iron pipe that has that longer value than maybe something that's not as
cheaper.
As great. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Other questions? Springtime? Okay. So I think this is where we turn back to the body and say, what do you guys want to do? I think this is the opportunity for council to express, thoughts, concerns. And I would just add, in addition to saying, yeah, I really want to go for it and see us do it, or no, I really think this is a bad idea, I think it's really important to continue to give staff feedback as to the items that you want to see addressed in the future. But what we do have before us today is language to put forward on a bond vote that, again, due to funding reasons and necessities, would need to occur in May. So you have before you that bond warning language. So before we move on to the language, I want to open up this item, and we've got the project on kind of as an approval, but I think actually we'll just take the bond vote as the approval item on this and treat this like it's a discussion item, because that's really probably the way we should have done it. So I want to open it up to thoughts, concerns, and I think indications hopefully of what direction folks want to head as we move forward.
I just have a question about the timeline, and maybe there's an obvious reason for this that I'm just totally missing. But looking all the way down, what was the thought around a September 17th vote for the possibility of a local options tax?
I think the thought was to do that after you had made the decision to go forward or not go forward, that we didn't want to bring that to you for consideration and action until we knew whether there was a financing model that could work. I think if we decide to, if you all and the city decide to move forward with a local options tax and bring that back to the voters, we need to be very specific about how we're using those dollars. So to just bring, my recommendation will be to just bring that back to the voters sometime before you've had this go, no-go conversation. Doesn't directly tie that revenue stream to something.
And we wouldn't be able to have that discussion or be in that position and properly warn it for the August primary, but is there a reason why we couldn't do the November general?
You could absolutely do that in November or on town meeting day. As I was saying earlier, I don't anticipate that we would implement that tax in FY19. We would do it for FY20, so we absolutely could put that on a future ballot.
Okay.
It's a really good point, and one I actually didn't catch in the scheduling piece, because that would obviously would make a lot more sense. People are going to get fatigued on being asked to come vote in special elections for items to spend more money.
I have another question about the streetscaping piece. Something that I've thought about is, so one of the features of that is like having the bump outs. I think there's some aesthetic to that, but also like sort of slowing traffic flow maybe. My concern would be if we find ourselves in like 15 years, traffic flow has escalated so much on that corridor that we want a third lane. Are we going to be in a position where we have to spend a bunch of money to tear out what we had just put in?
I'm gonna kick that one over to our traffic consultant, VHB, because I know she's been living with this project for a very long time.
Can you guys introduce yourselves
Yes.
too? We should have done that in the beginning. I'm sorry.
Hi, Dan Peck, PHP. I'm the senior roadway transportation engineer.
I'm Erin Collin, also with BHB. I'm a transportation planner and traffic engineer. I guess I can speak on the traffic. We looked out 20 years. We did projections based on speed trends projections and also some local projections. We looked at the Regional Planning Commission model on the corridor to see what they expected to happen in the area. And so we looked out 20 years for our traffic projections. There were huge changes. The intersections are where we focused on because that's where you'll see the congestion. And there wasn't any meaningful change from now until then in severe degradation and traffic flow or anything. So we anticipated that along the corridor, especially between those intersections, you won't notice much of a change.
Great, thank you.
It's like say, the current concept doesn't have a lot of bump outs. It's really in a couple strategic locations. But the primary corridor is essentially 40 feet all the way down, except for a couple key locations. And if we ever had to rip out bump outs, it's not a huge expense. It's removing curb and sidewalk, a little bit of sidewalk, and then basically repatching it.
Don't tell it to our plow drivers though, because they always love bump outs, right? It's really expensive and almost impossible to do. Yes.
So this is a challenging process for me, partly because we're asking the community to vote on a bond before we have the financing figured out, and so it's a little cart before the horse. But I think even bigger picture for me is the question of affordability in this community and what impact this project could have on the relative affordability. And there's a lot of unknowns, right? And I really appreciate all the hard work that's gone into moving this project from concept to potential bond vote in a pretty short time frame with new staff coming on board, and also appreciate the fact that there are funding opportunities that may or may not go away in the future, and that in order to take advantage of them, we need to follow these rules that we might not like. So I want to say that I'm not going to vote in favor of this tonight, but that should not be say anything about the work that you've all done to get us to this point. My main concern is the scope and magnitude of this project along that corridor, when most of the parcels are owned by just a couple developers, to me increases the likelihood that we will see rapid development of the corridor in conjunction with the construction. It makes sense that developers would say, we're going to seize this time when the street's totally torn up to redevelop these parcels. And again, I believe that was part of the vision for this gateway and the community's vision. But I'm not sure that some of the ripple effects were well understood, and I don't believe they're well understood enough today in order for me to support moving forward on this timeline. I think the Housing Commission has done some good work in terms of understanding the landscape that we're in terms of the housing mix, but has not completed its work on targets and what our zoning and goals should be with respect to ensuring a balance of housing. So my fear is that we will not have concluded the work we need to conclude on housing in order to put some guardrails along the development, and subsequently we will have higher rent replacing and I don't know enough about what the rents are in the corridor, but I do know that some of the new units go for more than I've ever paid in Winooski. And so again, we don't now have a planning and zoning administrator, so the notion that we can fast track that work in order to even get it done before the August vote seems unlikely. So given the concerns I have about the cost of the project and what that's going to do to property tax rates, water rates, sewer rates for residents, in addition to the likelihood of development occurring in a way that makes those properties less affordable, in the absence of our work on putting those guardrails in place, I can't support the vote at this time. But thank you for all the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think that you raise a really relevant concern there, and not to put you on the spot, but Heather, do you happen to know what the makeup is along the Main Street corridor?
Well, I mean, I know that the new units that have come in are affordable to people between 80 and 120% area median income, and I've checked them since, and they remain affordable to people at that rate. I don't know what would come in the future. I can't say off the top of my head what all the pricing is for the housing that's there now. And I think there are several complex issues that are involved in that. What I will say is development of more housing, period, will help to create an affordable community because we are in a housing crisis. So not having enough housing for the demand increases the cost of housing. So that, you know.
Thank you.
At a high level, that's kind of how it's functioning.
So I don't know if 80 to 120% means anything to people watching, but $1,700 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment might mean something. That's pretty, that is just a figure.
Sure. And I really appreciate it too, and I think a lot of that were thoughtful things that we need to be really cognizant of, and I think the planning strain is really important. We've spent a lot of time over the last 6 months especially really extolling the virtues of affordable housing in Winooski, and I think it's really important that we recognize why we have affordable housing in Winooski, and what that narrative is, because it seems to me it's gone more and more towards Winooski was really smart and thoughtful and planned ahead and brought in a bunch of affordable housing. That's not what happened. Our city had pretty much total financial collapse. Our downtown rotted out. It became a city that lost thousands of people and only had 7,000 people to begin with. And there was a flight out of the community. That's what initially created Winooski being a really affordable place. There are a lot of beautiful outcomes from that. We became a place that was ripe for a lot of diverse settlement. We became a place where people who were starting in the country new could find affordable housing. But it wasn't because a bunch of politicians set and made smart policies. That's giving people too much credit and I think skews the narrative. So I guess from my perspective, and that sounds a little harsh, but I think from a real perspective, that's what happened. And we're climbing from a price range right now, and I think that's absolutely accurate. And there's a lot of work to be done around making sure that we do put some bumpers on that bowling alley and continue to support the stock of affordable housing that we have. But I don't think a future policy is saying let's keep something that's not in good shape and not working depressed in order to keep things affordable. That to me, from a municipal management standpoint, and the way I look at governance for a community, is kind of a risky proposition. It keeps us in a cycle of having really minimal investment opportunities on only the assets that we currently have. So I guess that part from a narrative standpoint, something this whole body's going to have to figure out what our thoughts are on it. I don't know. It feels to me like the conversation's gone there a few times. Like we're going to make policies that are suddenly going to pump the brakes or cause, and that's just not reality. And if there are such tight constraints, restrictions, and policies put in place, there will be nothing built here. And I will also add that the infrastructure in a project like this supports the independent developer, supports the nonprofit developer, supports the person who wants to rebuild their single-family home the same. The scale is different, but the infrastructure serves anybody who uses it. So I guess those are just a few of the points I guess I kind of took a different approach to.
That's fine. I don't think I was selling a narrative that we got where we are because of good policy. My point is, I believe it's our obligation moving forward when we're seeing the scope of development that lies ahead to put some guardrails in, and we haven't done that.
No. And I agree that's been the handed focus of the Housing Commission, and that there are absolutely steps that need to be taken. I think this is not going to. I think it's going to cause development. That's part of the point of it, quite frankly, and redevelopment and good land use. That's part of why we're doing it. But I do think that there's time for us on the Housing Commission side still to have a pretty thoughtful conversation. The body's moving forward from a policy perspective. So I guess I still see a window to do that in conjunction with this, personally.
Seth, I'm wondering if in your professional life you've seen what some of the impact that infrastructure improvements might have on communities and affordable housing or subsidized housing organizations being able to continue to build?
The most recent numbers are affordable housing units have reached in Vermont, or depending on where you're at, somewhere around $285,000 to $300,000 per unit to develop. In terms of the costs associated with the infrastructure necessary to support that, that's been the number one escalator from a financial perspective. And a lot of that has to do with the limitation in joining funding opportunities with federal programs that are no longer active. And just to be disclosed, I'm going to be recusing later because you guys are going to consider actual USDA funding, which I work for USDA and Housing Programs Director. So I step aside for those conversations. We're a federal entity, but we rely on other federal funders at times to help with those processes. So infrastructure is the thing that when we have conversations on the state perspective, coordinating that investment together with housing and commercial development has been really key, because it significantly lowers the barrier of entry for the affordable housing developers too. And if we wanted to have, an in-depth conversation about that, a great person to invite would be Housing Vermont, who spends a lot of time trying to pencil out these projects where they're getting hit with wastewater and water fees. And to that point, what we did with the Strand project was go try to get CDBG funding. And we were successful in getting $250,000 locked up in infrastructure improvement funding. Unfortunately, that's not looking like it's going to get the use we'd hoped for. But of the applications available from the public data, I would probably say 85% of those projects were housing related, going to the state for nonprofit housing development and saying, we can't pay for these infrastructure costs, we need these couple $100,000 to make that work. That was a really long answer, I'm sorry.
No, thank you, I appreciate it.
I support this project going forward, and I see the support as a yellow light, not a green light. I think it's going to be critical in the next few months to come in with the real numbers that can give us the confidence that this can be something supported by the community. I believe if not now, then when? Because I think we're at a point with our infrastructure that it's long overdue to be brought into the 21st century. And if we're going to have an inviting gateway into our city, I think this is the project to do it.
So I also am in support of moving this forward. I feel the same way about the utility situation. I would also like to see our downtown extend from just the Rotary, moving it up Main Street to a degree. Having some development there, having some new housing, having some more tax base would be helpful. I worry about our tax rate, which is already, I think, third highest in the state, climbing even higher, depending on funding. But I think also having these phased options is really helpful, because the vision I have, I don't see the downtown extending all the way up Main. You get up near the highway. I don't know how that will that will ever look the same as you do in the core of Winooski. And so I think having this option to at least address the necessary utilities like the water and the sewer, and then maybe when it comes to streetscaping and utilities, think about where that benefit is versus maybe concerns about developing the entire corridor and pushing out affordable housing or something. I think having the option to find some middle point there, that we have that option, makes it easier for me to say, yes, let's move forward in this process.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah, I guess speaking to or questioning about some of the issues that Nicole brought up, which I share a lot of similar anxiety. I don't know, Heather, if you have any sort of update of where the Housing Commission is at right now and looking at targets and starting to move into
We
policy
had
examination?
initially come up with targets. There were actual target percentages of new development. We didn't bring them forward. We brought forward general goals, but so there are targets to be brought forward. We've moved into, in our most recent meeting, we started to define general principles that guide our decision making, and those principles were taken primarily from the strategic vision, also from direct council directives that we've had in the past, mostly through the strategic planning process last year. So we've come up with a series of principles, and I'm refining that. The commission has decided, is following pretty much directly what's up there. So it's a mix, it's affordable, it's, you know, all of that. And then they've also added that they want to be data-driven. That's one of their key guiding principles. So we're going to continue on that path, and we've started looking at single-family homes, but in a very targeted and directed way, which is specific things that we can influence, you know, because there are certain things within the market that we can't influence. And we are looking at that through the lens of the Winooski Housing Needs Assessment and some of the things that were recommended there.
Okay.
So that's where we are at this juncture.
So starting down the road at looking at policies
Yes, that's right.
to move towards those goals. Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no problem.
Other questions or thoughts? I'll just, I shared the housing thoughts, but, you know, I think it's really hard. This community took the biggest risk that any communities, especially from a size perspective, I think has ever taken in the state of Vermont, in the redevelopment of the downtown. Just a massive, I won't say roll of the dice, because it was done very thoughtfully. But it took a lot of courage, and it took a lot of foresight, thought, and really careful execution. And I don't know what else to say other than it's worked. And I think that success is playing out. It's something that we've truly benefited from as a generation of leaders, was all that hard work that was done. And when that idea came about, the hope was it would become, again, this economic heart for the town, where there had been so many disappointments with urban renewal that, you know, hadn't taken root. And the hope was that it would provide, you know, an engine for us. And this is exactly having the type of interest we've had on Main Street, the interest there. Is exactly the byproduct that project was intended to create. And I do think we've been really thoughtful and deliberate about reaching out and getting a community sense of what they want those corridors to look like. I think we have to recognize that we are spending a significant amount of our capital and our capital improvement capacity. And one thing I've been really happy and pleased with this body about over the years that I've been involved is we've taken those steps and movements in a group way and believed in what we were going after, and understood that we probably sacrificed some of the things that we individually thought in our brain we could also do with that money. And this is the highest calling of that sacrifice, because it's a heavy lift, not just for the community, but for us from a future management perspective, and we need to be honest about that. And it means that our redevelopment of the other corridors is going to have to look very different. We can't come back and do this again next year and have that done on Allen Street or Mounts Bay. We have slightly different situations there, but regardless, that's a fact that remains. We're not gonna have 100% clarity on everything walking into this. We're not. There's going to be risk involved, and there's got to be a little risk tolerance with it, and that's really hard to do with other people's money in a community. But to me, that's what we're put in these positions to do, and the decisions that we're being asked to make. So, I think that this is a transformational project. I think it does something for the community and city that it's really hard to weigh just how beneficial it could be in the long run. So I've appreciated all the thoughts. I do think that there's still obviously just lists and lists and lists of questions, and I appreciate the the metaphor of it being a yellow light versus a green light, and that makes a lot of sense that there's still a lot of items to iron out and put forward, but this feels like a positive step, so.
I do feel like in moving forward without knowing what the complete funding package looks like, we have the opportunity, if it comes in at such a radically different level than what we're looking at, to be able to react differently. But this allows us to put it in front of the community and have people weigh on if it is something that is important to them and that they want to see move forward. I do support moving this project forward, but I think that for me, this really puts the fire under ensuring accountability that we have to get those guardrails up so that we are developing in a responsible way. I have a lot of anxiety about it, and it makes me really nervous to do so, but I also think that it's the point we need to continue to move that train forward as fast as we can before it runs away from us.
And to that point, I would also say that should the vote be positive on the bond piece, I think you brought up a really important part is, I think instantly on the next step for us is the communication to the community, and that's something that's going to need to be directed very, very quickly in terms of saying, you're voting on this number doesn't mean anything to people, what's the potential impact, and that be relayed to them in a very conservative manner that also recognizes we might not even at that point have those pieces all perfectly percentaged out. That's not the way these votes work. It's not the way it works here. It's not the way it works anywhere. And then you're right. And then even then, if it's a positive vote, have to potentially walk it back. If it comes back, this is going to be 20 cents on the tax, and there's nothing we can do but that.
I do think it's difficult if the community approves the bond vote and the projections are what they are, for this council to say, sorry, we're not gonna do it, is challenging. I mean, it's just the process is, if you're, to say that we will have the community approve it and then reserve judgment about whether to go forward is challenging to me.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it either. But I mean, I think that would only be the case if the projections that were used for the approval by the voters came, and the reality came in so different that it just did not meet what the voter intent was when people approved it. I think that's the only time I feel comfortable. If it's a small portion off, I don't think that's the reason.
Well, we don't have the housing stuff done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Could I recommend that if there's an authorization, typically on something like this, I would work in close consultation with city manager on developing messaging. Could I recommend that council, if there is a vote, also put forward an additional person to work on that, please? Because I think we need to have a messaging, how to relay to people about the financial pieces and make sure there's another set of eyes on that with me, to ensure that we're comfortable with the numbers that are being outlaid to the public. Because waiting for another round of meetings to happen, if that's gonna be something we need to jump on, it'd be nice to have another set of eyes on that.
Are you looking for a volunteer?
Are you a solution looking for a
I'll
problem?
do it. I'll do it.
Awesome.
So, just along those lines, if you do decide to move forward, we did suggest a communication schedule between now and that date, that would start next week with the Planning Commission, Public Works Commission, a community dinner, and obviously a public hearing required. So
Great.
we have started to do some thinking around that, but certainly the messaging that takes place at those events is a different thing.
And I think it's a couple sets of eyes to look at the financial thresholds to understand what especially what the general fund tax implication rates could be. I'm going to be honest, people probably aren't, I mean, there are plenty that will be, but from, what's coming out of the reserve on the water side, probably not as much interest, that tax rate one especially. I think being really upfront about what the potential range the council might be considering is important messaging. That's the financial promise. Saying $23 million doesn't mean anything to anybody. That would be my thought on that.
I guess for both staff and council, what are people's comfortabilities or thoughts on, I know for our housing commission, we have this work plan or timeline that's aligned with our strategic vision statement. What are people's thoughts on maybe looking at what a work plan and timeline for the work the housing commission needs to do in advance of increased development on Main Street being aligned with this project timeline?
That makes sense to me.
How do people feel about that?
Setting a goal for, I don't know if this is still true, but I think one of the pending next steps was to actually provide some policy recommendations to planning.
Yeah, and we have a list of policy recommendations. It's an awkward time with the planning commission right now, with a new commission coming on and the municipal plan going on, but certainly that is on the radar, and I think we need to come up with a work plan for the planning commission.
Absolutely, but just to be clear, the planning commission and the housing commission are your policy arms. So to the extent that you want to direct them to look at things within the next 4 months, that's why they're there. They're there to do that work for you. So I think if that was of interest to you to set we want you to explore X, Y, and Z policies, or we want to hear 5 policies or whatever, there's definitely room to have that conversation, and that would be a good agenda item for next time.
Okay. Yeah, that would make me feel more comfortable. That's a possibility. And I'll put some thought into
I think it'd be good to know, have like a current state of cost of housing and what the new development going in is actually, and it's, for me, more useful to hear. I mean, I think the income brackets are helpful, but that's not necessarily well understood by folks. So what's the actual cost in terms of monthly rent for X size unit?
So that was provided as part of the presentation, so.
Not for Main Street. I think it was citywide.
The new units, if I may, I'm sorry, the new units on Main Street were included in that and were broken out by what the costs were. I've gone back and checked to see if the costs are aligned with what I had originally shown you. They are, the ones that have been permitted at the point that we gave the presentation, but we can certainly definitely will continue to monitor that. New ones come in, and as I get more information about what they're planning on charging.
And what
they're actually charging. Yeah, I went back and reviewed.
No, I mean, and what the parcels that have not been developed, what the cost is for housing in those units. Because I'm interested in, one of the things we spoke about was replacement.
Yep.
So what are the existing units? What's the difference
So if
between
the market is
existing
pushing
and new?
for $1,700 a month, if you're building something new, but currently it's, I don't know, $1,000, I mean, I don't know. That's
It'd be good to see that comparison.
important to know.
Any other questions, concerns, thoughts from council? Questions, concerns, thoughts from the public? Everybody thinks it's a good idea, bad idea? There's heads shaking on both, so that's okay. With that, we will consider that the completion of the item F, excuse me. Of item F, and we'll take up item G, which is the necessity and reimbursement resolution for a bond vote, given the discussion was online with that. And are there specific concerns in regards to this document?
So if I can just give a quick summary of this document. So this is a statutory requirement that you pass a resolution deeming that there is a necessity to do this project, as outlined in the resolution, in advance of scheduling a bond vote. There are 2 important aspects of this resolution. One, that the project is necessary, And 2, it includes a reimbursement clause, which says that we're allowed to bond up to the $23 million threshold, and we anticipate spending up to $2 million in advance of taking out that bond that we can then reimburse ourselves for when we take out that bond. So that's very necessary in order to move the project forward through engineering and bidding before we actually start construction. This resolution was drafted by our bond counsel, our lawyer. It is not something that we arbitrarily came up with.
Shoot, I had a couple just sentences I wanted to tweak. No?
No.
Oh, not going to law school was the best call ever. I'm just teasing. Other questions, comments, concerns from council? Any questions, concerns, comments from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion for approval of the necessity and reimbursement resolution for bond vote.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Christine, second by Hal. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed?
No.
Motion stands. And so that's completion of that item. We'll move on to item H, which is approval of the warning of a special meeting and public hearing.
So that now that you've found the need to have a bond vote, this is to actually set the meeting date for a special citywide meeting to conduct that bond vote. We are recommending that be held on May 8th. Carol and I did a fair amount of calendaring around when would be a good time for that, given the window within which we need to hold the bond vote. Keeping it on a Tuesday, our elections have historically always been on Tuesday, so we don't want to get off that pattern for people, and not doing it the week that taxes are also due, and therefore really burdening our staff. So we recommend May 8th and present to you a warning for the special meeting on May 8th and the public hearing required in advance of that on May 7th, which you have a regular council meeting that night. So we recommend holding that public hearing at that regular meeting.
Okay, and so with that, any questions, concerns on this item from council? Any questions, concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for the warning of the special meeting and public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Christine, second by Hal. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Item I, State Revolving Fund Drinking Water Grant Application.
So now before you is a series of 4 different 2 state applications for loans and subsidies, and 2 for the federal government. So the first 2 are from the State Revolving Loan Fund. The first one the mayor just called on was the drinking water grant application. This is our internal process per our policy, where we say to you, give us permission to apply for outside funding opportunities before we actually go forward and do it, especially in a case like this, which is a new endeavor, not something that you have already budgeted for through the regular budget process. So a yes vote approves this internal funding application proposal and lets us move forward. I would request that for each of the next 4 votes, you also consider as part of that authorizing me to sign all of the loan or grant application documents. There will be a lot of them, so instead of bringing them back to you each time, authorizing me to sign them would be very administratively helpful. Do you want details on what these specific ones are?
No. I think let's just take the drinking water one first, and if someone makes a motion, please just indicate authorizing the city manager to sign on behalf of the city. If you want to come back the next meeting, even if there's going to be more and more of those associated with it, well, I guess we would need to see the funding stream anyway, so that doesn't matter. Okay. So we can just one off each of those. Just if you could remember to put that into your motion, we would appreciate it. Any questions, concerns from council from this specific one again, we're just looking first at the state revolving fund drinking water grant application. Free money is always good. Any questions or concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the state revolving fund drinking water grant application, authorizing the city manager to sign on the city's behalf.
So moved.
Motion by Hal, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Item J, item J is state revolving fund clean water grant application. Can we, anything else? You good? Any questions, concerns from council? Any questions or concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval on the state revolving fund clean water grant application.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Hal. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. On the item K and item L, I'm going to recuse. I'm an employee at USDA Rural Development working in the housing division, and cannot be party to any request to the USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture, for funds.
Turn it over, the gavel now belongs to Deputy Mayor.
Let's go.
So, item K, USDA Community Facilities Grant Application. Anything we need to know about this?
So there are these two applications are to the federal government, USDA Rural Development. The community facilities would be to fund the work not associated with the underground utilities. So not associated with the municipal underground utilities. So the bearing of the telecom and power lines and all the streetscape improvement work.
Okay. Any questions? Any questions or comments from the public? Okay, I'll take a motion to approve the USDA Community Facilities Grant application, authorizing Jesse Baker to sign on our behalf.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Christine. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Item L, USDA Water and Environmental Program.
So this is out of the same office, a different funding source, which is really meant to subsidize and incentivize the water and wastewater utility work.
Thank you. Any questions? Questions from the public? Comments? I will entertain a motion to approve the USDA Water and Environmental Program grant application, authorizing Jesse Baker to sign on our behalf.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Christine. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item M.
Didn't we
Mr.
have
Mayor,
a 2-minute break?
let's take a 2-minute recess.
Thank you all very much.
All right, we're going to call back to order the Winooski City Council meeting and pick up on our agenda. We will pick up with item M, which is discussion and or approval of Myers pool update and follow-up information.
All right. So, as everyone remembers from last time, presentation on the details, Mark from Weston and Sampson had joined me last meeting to go over the preliminary engineering report. Some really good questions and asks from you all for some follow-up data. So here I am with that data. So things that were requested that we brought back tonight were some usership data. So that's been presented to you in a memo back to summer of 2011, which was as far back as I had it. Cost modeling for various fundraising levels. So what we have done here is include some spreadsheets that show fundraising levels equating to 250,000, 500,000, 750,000, and $1 million. And they're included in the packet for comparison. A pretty detailed memo that Mark from Weston and Sampson worked with me to produce around value engineering options. So I think that again gives a nice sort of menu of the different potential pieces that could or could not kind of be scaled back, and then the sort of recommended approach there if we were to do value engineering in the project. Also, as requested, a sort of minimum replacement model. So, and I've used the term in quote here, bare bones, just because that's what was referred to in Mark's memo, so that we could be talking the same language across those two memos. And then a little bit of detail here about sort of plans for subsequent community outreach around the project, but I think that's an area that, dependent on the flavor of the conversation tonight, we can talk further about. So, I'm hopeful the memo is fairly straightforward. One thing I do want to note for you all in your packet, and I have the larger versions here, is that I did include for those various financial models just a 7-year projection. We've modeled that out to 20 years, but it was going to be like tiny, tiny print. So I have those here if there are questions or people want to see that data out further, but I think it gives everybody a pretty safe comparison between the different approaches. So I'm going to pause there and ask if there are additional questions or comments on what was shared.
Rock and roll, yeah.
So I had, I can't remember which memo it said, but it's one of these memos said that if we move to a bare bones, the projections around revenue coming in because people are excited about a new facility would be, lower. Although it seems to be in the modeling you've done, we're not assuming any real increase in revenue due to a nicer facility.
Right.
So I'm challenged, I guess, by, on the one hand, if we move to a bare bones pool, we won't see this increased revenue, but we don't have models that show what that increased revenue might look like and how that might translate in terms of overall impact.
Sure.
And when the gentleman was here last month, he indicated that a comparable community with a comparable pool was bringing in quite a bit of revenue a year. So, and so I just want to check in about why we're modeling such low revenue coming in.
Yep. No, that's a really good question. And I think in retrospect, probably based on that conversation, maybe something we should have updated. I think, again, the number that Mark had shared based on the community in Maine that we were sort of comparing to, similar size demographic, was basically they were covering their operating costs. So if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was right around $80,000 annually that they were bringing in for revenue. That's with sort of a more built out pool.
Right.
I think it's fair to say, and I think the approach I would take certainly is if we were to build sort of that bare bones model, which is essentially a replacement more or less of what's there now, I think it would be wise for us to model that off of the usage data that we've seen to date, which is what that number here is.
Right.
So yes, I think there is a discrepancy there on the annual operating side. Figure probably $75,000 is, I think, to make the math easy, a number that you could add or subtract based on the scaling of that facility. But it's a good question.
I would like to chime in on that. The other facility that was referred to was located in Waterville, Maine.
Yes.
And I looked that town up, it has double the population that we do. And it makes it difficult for me to think that, it also seems to be more rurally located. It makes it difficult for me to make a correlation there that our nicer, newer facility would pull in new revenue the way that that one did.
I think fair, and I think all of these are best comparisons, right? There isn't another Winooski anywhere in the world. So I think we're making our best guess here when it comes to these projections. Is there one more?
Winooski, Wisconsin,
Oh, yeah.
population 0. Sorry.
Yes, okay. With all due respect and deference to Winooski, Wisconsin.
It was a settler from Winooski that went there, opened it up, and there's a restaurant
Yeah.
named after it now. I'm sorry.
No, I think, Christine, to your point, I think one of the things Mark and I talked about in looking at Waterville is that the community, the core community is bigger, yes, but because it is more rural in nature, it doesn't have the ability to draw from the surrounding areas in the same way that we feel like we probably would. So figuring Colchester, probably some from Burlington, some from Essex, we have a bigger general population base that we could draw from. And in that case, it felt like a fairly safe bet. The other argument you could go down as well, it's rural, there's not a lot else going on. This is kind of the one place to go.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But again, I think there's so many of those questions that you could bring up of why other communities are not exactly the same. So again, I think these models are that. They're models.
I also think when Ray and Angela and I have been talking about these models, and in past conversations we've had about the community services fees and Thrive, we're having this conversation regularly about to what degree we want to subsidize programs, and to what degree we want to ensure that our municipal assets are open and accessible to all. So I think we deferred on these models to for lack of a better word, lowballing the revenue projections, because we've historically held that value of, while wanting to collect some revenue, wanting to make sure that our assets were as open and accessible as all. So if you want, as we move forward with these conversations, if the council wants to provide us a different level of guidance, or direct us to provide a tiered payment system and model out what that could look like, we're happy to do that. But we've been trying to be pretty conservative on our revenue projections for user rates.
And it feels like historically, when you look at the rates that we charge, they're extremely low.
Yeah, especially our daily rates.
And visits to the pool declined, I think, as the quality of the experience declined. Can anybody say off the top of their head what the impact the tax rate would be if operating expenses were covered by revenue?
Angela?
I want to break it out between operating expenses versus debt service.
Would reduce it by 110,000 at a high point, right? So it'd be 2 cents less.
Yeah,
That's
about right.
5 or 6 cents.
But the revenue is only currently projected to touch about 10% of peak operating.
Yeah, between 1 and 2 pennies would be the impact.
Thanks.
On the total.
So when I looked at the modeling in here, and thanks for breaking everything out, I think what I saw is that if we went from like the full out project down to the bare bones, it was about almost 40% reduction in cost, which I feel is kind of significant. In the pool is actually the thing that I've heard the most about from like community members. But the message that I always am asked is, when is the pool going to reopen? Like, I've never actually heard anyone express that they're looking for an increase or like an advanced facility. For me personally, I think based on that, I feel like this breakout of the pieces that are listed individually should be, I would like to see like all of those tied to the fundraising.
So all those value engineered pieces. above the bare bones level.
Yeah, above the actual just reopening the pool.
So, I think we kind of discussed that sort of, and that's, city comes in and I bear a price that's the bare minimum, and then the adjustments are made based off of available funding. Does that make sense? And then somebody can put their name on a slide with a fat check, right?
Yeah, I wonder if that's been considered either, like adding some, maybe this is completely distasteful, but like advertisement to the facility. You know, how they have like banners or whatever at baseball parks.
Yeah, no, we've definitely talked at points, I think both about giving people an opportunity to put their name on various pieces of the facility, but also different fundraising possibilities with local businesses and things like that. So yeah, that's all been part of the conversation to date with the pool committee.
Okay.
I think there are some exceptions. I like the concept with some exceptions that I wouldn't want to see if we're moving forward with a pool going down to the bare bones pool the bare bones model only includes the competition pool.
Right.
So there isn't that separate pool for other community members. So I think that's one piece that I would want to see included.
Yeah, I would have a hard time removing the family pool option, just because we do there is at least now an option for, it's not just a competitive swimming space, but there's.
I see
toddler
value in
type,
that,
you know.
more than some of the other features.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And just since this is another one of the larger ticket items, but community room sort of gathering space would stay in that sort of.
I had a question about that
fundraise
too.
add-on.
Like, do we see this as a revenue generator? Are we saying our existing community space rented up?
Yes, so I think what we are seeing is that there are definitely times during the busy seasons at the O'Brien Center in particular, that space is limited. And I think especially if some of these fit up projects down there go forward, childcare in particular, that's gonna take another rental space off the board, potentially. So I think there's a market for that space. I also think its proximity to both the pool and the park make it a pretty desirable space for birthday parties, camp groups, whatever. So I don't think we'd struggle to put that into play. And that's why we really looked at it as a year-round facility. I think it's also a nice way to kind of add some vibrancy to that park throughout the course of the year versus just during the summer months. So.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if that answered the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, it
but
does.
Yeah.
Ray, do you know if the development committee has done any kind of feasibility work to figure out what is possible to raise?
I do not, to be honest with you. I know they have plans to meet with a professional fundraiser who has been out of state and I believe is returning, if not this week, next, I think is what they said. But I don't know that they've done that level of work. I think the number that we had thrown around very early on in the process as a group was, more or less splitting the difference of the cost. I think we all did that knowing full well that that was a really, frankly, aspirational reach. And that was half of that $4.4 million initial projection. So, it's challenging to answer the question here of what that feasibility could be on a project like this. I think again, that's work I'd want to do with a professional in that fundraising field.
That they would want to do, we would not be doing, but yeah.
If it were me, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I may, council might recall from last week that the pool committee indicated they had set a target of $1 million for their fundraising effort. As to feasibility, I don't know if they have done any clear study on that. The fundraiser that Ray refers to has met with the committee about 6 months ago, and they did discuss that sort of thing at that time. I don't think they came to any hard conclusions.
Something that was, I guess, what we heard was, I guess the value engineering scares me. And it scares me from a longevity of facility perspective, and it scares me from the reason the pool's closed in part now is because of sanitation issues and our discomfort with keeping up, having one sand filter. Oh my goodness, I know too much about this. One sand filter.
1.5.
Being able to do the work right.
Yeah.
The loss of the UV light, the loss of some of the wrapping around some of the other pieces. Those parts scared me more than the slides.
Yes.
And that, I guess that part was, I don't know, made me a little squeamish. So I do wonder too if, I don't know. I mean, I've appreciated that approach, kind of saying at some point the city could draw a line and say this is what we're comfortable with putting forward and bridge a gap, and it gives people a number to reach for. I would also just want to see some kind of prioritization around that discussion, that maybe was collaborative. And I hate to say that because you don't want to steal from somebody the ability to say I really want to fund this, but. I don't know, and maybe that wouldn't work. I'm just expressing some frustration at losing some of those items that would elongate the life of the pool, make it a safer facility in the long run, predictably too.
I agree. I think it's tough though too, because a lot of those items that I would view as a necessity are some of the bigger ticket items too, which have the bigger financial impact. Because I think, like we heard from the consultant last time around, that the material used, it's like the Murtha pool, whatever that material is, I've never heard of it. The difference between that and concrete pool is like pretty significant in regards to the lifespan of the pool. So even though it's, that's one of the bigger ticket items, it's gonna stretch a lot longer down the road in what we're actually investing in.
Yeah, and that specific item, I think there is a return on investment there that will pay for itself. The difference in costs up front over the 20-year life of that first 20 years, the bond life of that pool would be caught back because there's not concrete work. It's basically a stainless steel that's laminated with PVC. Again, things I know more about than I thought I would. That's built off site, and then they sort of erect or set the thing together here, and then sort of fuse all the bits together. So it's a metal pool versus a concrete pool. So there's
one of the
actually
big bleeds previously was we were losing a ton of water, right? I mean, there was a lot. We think we were.
Oh no, we know we were.
Yeah.
The previous pool was concrete with a liner over it, and
Yeah.
when leaks had happened, the chemicals had started to erode the concrete behind it and
That's
created
crazy.
some structural issues. And the other nice thing about the Murtha system is that there's less structural concrete needed because it's a lighter structure. So that's another savings up front. But yeah, but still extra 200,000 more up front. You save that over time, but that's the trade-off.
So, but the recommendations for deductions here don't include the Murtha system, right? So
Correct.
it's, the item selected will provide cost savings but not substantially change the look of the facility, take away from programming, or add significant future maintenance costs. So that's, I would be comfortable sticking with the recommendations that the engineers have stated would not add significant, I mean, I don't know what significant means, but I think,
Yeah, I think to your point, Nicole, maybe I think the savings over time between the two systems is not hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's probably more in the order of tens of thousands of dollars.
I'm also comfortable with that deduction list, but on that note about cost versus maintenance, I think a slide and sprinkler features are maintenance nightmares, like down the line. I also wonder if that increases like liability insurance related to supporting this facility.
So in terms of the maintenance elements, I am in no way equipped to say what the maintenance liability for a slide or a spray feature would be. I'm happy to ask Mark that question. I mean, I think if it were a significant concern, it would have been captured. There is, in the information from last meeting, kind of a spelled out equipment and capital budget over the 20-year life of the pool. And that included all the equipment, all the bits and parts that are going in. So that's the pumps for the spray features, the slides, all those things. So those costs were baked into that operating budget over the 20-year life. I don't remember offhand.
Yeah.
Concrete versus, whatever goes on the slide, what those costs were. But suffice it to say, it's baked into the projection here. And then the second question, sorry, liability. So we have talked a little bit about that. It's been a while, but early on in the process about, especially in the context of diving boards, we talked about that. So I think those were removed and are pretty routinely being removed from facilities because of increased liability. From what I recall of our conversation with Weston and Sampson, the other features are not, the ones included here are not highly different in the liability. So
I would just flag that also, as we discussed before, adding the slide also increased our staffing obligation and cost.
VLCT, where are they coming? Do we give them a diagram of this and say what's it going to cost to insure? Just out of curiosity. Yeah.
Exactly. And, honestly, pools are actually pretty typical municipal insurance coverage items. It's not usually unusual for VLCT to insure pools. So we would be put into the pool with the rest of the communities in the state that have that feature.
And I guess I just want to clarify too that but the deductions list that I think everybody's pointing to, where it's you won't lose any structural thing, results in about a roughly 10% cost reduction. If to remove all those things gets us to the 40% deduction. Yeah. Just for the public's benefit, I wanted to.
Well, and maybe the numbers are in here, so I apologize if they are. But what's the difference if we're looking at actual, the dollars and cents for an average home between those two?
So when I did it, what we saw in this document was that it was going to be about $143 per home. At the bare bones rate, it was down to, I think, 113.
114.
Yeah.
So from the full project as presented to the bare bones, that difference ends up being about right around $70 annually to the average home.
And so with the recommended value engineering or whatever.
Yeah. So that number,
because I don't have a feeling like it's really substantial.
The skimmed down version versus the bare bones.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah.
Yep. So that number cuts off about, we'll say for comparatives, about 250,000. So if you look at that fundraising number in here, where is it? The $250,000 fundraising level, 173. So about $10 a year to the average home.
I think if it is going to be something that moves forward, I'm fine with just doing it right. I don't think for a $10 difference. Right. And one of the items in that list, to speak to Seth's point, is a UV disinfection system. And if we want a lot of people to be using the pool, I feel like I want that to be a very sanitary pool.
Yeah.
I would advocate for some middle ground of reducing some of the more luxury features that we're looking at here.
Like the slide?
Yes, that's one of them.
So what you could request is sorry to drive you guys nuts, but what you could request for, if you wanted to use your model of chunking out financing, is say, add back in health, safety, and longevity items. And what's that number look like? And because this list is not done between, they just looked for where they could save money. They did not look for what is functional versus, I don't want to say luxury item, but an added entertainment value, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, so the added value in the actual longevity, totally see that, versus not luxury items. That's what I feel should be tied to the fundraising versus what we're asking all of the taxpayers to fund.
Right.
The fun stuff.
Yeah.
For me, it's a slide in the community room where it's like you could have folks say this community room is the so-and-so's community room or the Nicole May's memorial slide.
Don't say memorial.
By the time I can afford it,
Check that off.
30 years from now.
There we go.
Maybe live a long and prosperous life.
Yeah,
It's just
maybe.
getting dark.
Yeah, sorry guys. No, but I think that, I also think those are easier to fundraise around
Mm-hmm.
a specific
Yeah.
feature.
I just thought of somebody's plaque on the UV.
Yeah, right, exactly. The disinfectant system.
A local cleaning company, perhaps. Are there other or questions about this information? I want to turn to process a little bit and timelines and what we're dealing with there. But I don't want to cut this conversation off if there's more interest in talking about that list or the numbers. Okay.
Comments?
Yes, sure.
I'm actually not sure who to address this question to, but was it said that the projected peak revenue of this facility would only cover about 10% of the total operating costs every year?
Currently, I'm sorry.
Nope. So if, based on the model we had seen from sort of, again, I'll use air quotes, a comparable pool in Maine, their annual operating revenue was about 80,000 annually. Our projected operating costs annually, not included debt service capital, was right around that same number, right around 80,000 to start. So theoretically, it would be about a 1-to-1 in a fully utilized pool to revenue to expenses, operating expenses. And then there'd be additional debt service and capital costs on top of that. So,
Thank you.
yep.
But that's not what we have in our financial modeling. Our financial models assume only 10% of operating as a conservative.
Yeah, because we had really low operating revenue when the pool was open a number of years ago, so we were modeling off that more conservative number just to play it safe.
Thanks.
Other questions, comments, concerns at this point? Yes, sir.
I'd like to just remind the council, or suggest to the council perhaps, that if you look at a reduced scheme for the pool, such as removing the slide, it might not then be possible to put the slide back in at a later time because there has to be some foundational work done. And once the pool is in the ground and the deck is finished, you really can't dig up any of that deck to put in the slide again. What you might want to think about is not removing the slide, but reducing the complexity of this slide. The slide that's proposed is quite complex. A simpler slide would reduce the cost by some amount. I don't know how much. The other thing I'd like to say about the slide in particular, and the evidence is anecdotal, but it's expected to be a revenue producer because it is expected that it will attract people from outside the community in addition to our own community users.
Thank you, Ron. We do have a lot of pictures of slide.
We do.
Yeah.
A lot of different angles.
I know. I try to keep your packet fun. It's my job.
Other questions, comments, concerns? And I'll just say too that certainly I would feel strongly as we've represented that body throughout that there will be, I don't think this body's expressed any interest in getting into taking our pencils out and specifically engineering things, that we will leave that to conversations and consultation for staff with the engineers and with those vested community interested parties. So, you know, we'll try not to make decisions like that where we take a public process apart and suddenly start taking authorship. Now, removing stuff, that's part of our job. Okay, can we go back to trailing through progress, funding timelines, and kind of walk through, I think, maybe what, I just think, I mean, the ultimate question is, I mean, I'm hearing some some ideas about coalescing around perhaps what is a base amount and then having a fundraising level. Is that a widely accepted concept that people would like to explore additionally?
I think it's really hard for us to assume a number that an outside group.
Consultants weigh in on that one.
Okay. So I think that that's that critical piece of information. I think expressing that to them, that that's a conversation that's being had would
So that's
be.
sort of feasibility, fundraising feasibility number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think getting an understanding of what they think their own capacity is, and unfortunately, it's not a professional field I've operated in. I don't know the rest of you, but it's, I think that's something that we'd have to be really thoughtful about in terms of how we set our number and hand them another one. But
Well, I think we've also talked about some blunders that have happened in other locations as well. So I think my big point of concern is that even if we're told a number that people feel very confident about, and we were to bond for a number based on what we're told, and it comes in under, then we all of a sudden don't have the money that we need to actually build the pool.
Right.
That's a big concern of mine. So I don't.
Well, that's why I think it's important to figure out which pieces of this could be directly tied to fundraising.
And so I guess within that too, I don't know if we could get info from other municipalities that have done similar projects where there was private fundraising around and how they kind of picked and arrived, or, how they landed on the numbers they decided to be on the actual bond vote.
But that really depends on your local capacity and how many other campaigns are going on and all those factors, so it's kind of hard to compare apples and apples.
Yeah, I guess I'm with Christine and saying that we can pare it down and say these are the things. If they want to be in it, then that's the private fundraising. But this is going to be the cost of the pool, assuming no fundraising for the pool we want to build, and that's what's going to be on the bond vote.
yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'd like to recommend that when this comes back, we have analysis of the community service department sort of strategy thinking about service provision over the next few years.
Can you say a little more about that?
Yep, sure. I think similar to spending a lot of money on one infrastructure project, we need to understand the ripple effect or potential capacity that we have to invest further from an operations standpoint and infrastructure standpoint in the other community services. Yeah. There's lots of conversations taking place that we don't hear about. So I just want to point out that if there's anything else that's kind of been in the hopper, that's been a big topic at the Community Service Commission standpoint, that having those come forward now from a valuing perspective would be very helpful. If we're gonna have this vote and then 6 months later also have a proposal to open up a new portion of the department that requires 2 staff, and this is why we think that's a really great idea. I'm not asking for competing ideas to come out of nowhere. It would be nice to hear what kind of strategic thinking or conversations have been going on from an expenditure potential standpoint.
Sure.
Anybody have an issue with that? It's not a conversation we've explored at all in this process. We've kind of gone forward saying we've had a pool, we're going to figure out how to replace it, and it's something that we've gotten a lot of feedback from community members on. I think that conversation warrants at least being surfaced. I hate that as a verb. Other items people want back?
So are we setting a timeline for when this is happening?
So I think from a funding perspective, you guys want to talk, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
From a funding timeline perspective, we've got moved to a bond vote. There's a couple natural opportunities to be thought of. Any thinking so far behind the way that might stack up, especially given the previous conversation we had this evening?
So the an option for you, I think we talked about this briefly at our last meeting, is with your pass vote on Main Street, that go, no-go decision will be coming back to you in August, is our current, when we expect to get those funding packages wrapped up. That leaves an August primary date for potential bond vote if you wanted to marry up those two go, no-go decisions. There's obviously also an opportunity at the November election that would give, if the council spent the next 2 or 3 months kind of coming to agreement with the fundraising committee about what those base rates were going to be and projections, that would give a couple of more months to the fundraising committee to raise some of those funds in advance of a bond vote in November. And then of course there's always a town meeting day vote in March, which would give more months for fundraising. I think the question becomes, do you want to see demonstration of fundraising before you put it to bond or after? I think what we understood from Mark is with August vote, we could go through engineering and bidding to start construction sometime during the following summer. If we may wait beyond that, we would be into the summer of 2021.
I think it's totally reasonable to be able to move forward in August.
I do too.
I think that's a decent
And I think you could, figure out talking to people about the pool. Summertime's a good time to do
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's certainly a political advantage from a conversational standpoint.
Woo, it's hot here.
And also, I think with Christine's idea too, we don't need to wait to see fundraising coming in because of the way we're structuring that. So we don't need to give additional months for the committee to do that.
And if the fundraising committee exceeds the features and raises revenue that could be, we're bonding up to an amount, we're not obligated to spend everything we deserve to borrow.
Well, we can talk about. I want a little pressure put on them, though. I don't. From just a logistics standpoint, I think we need to make it clear that there's going to be some stuff locked off if there's not money raised. Because when people see a bond vote pass, it's kind of like, do we really need to do anything now? And the answer and the expectation is yes, absolutely. Yes.
Let's do a slide. Community room.
You want a slide? Buy a slide.
We're sending Nicole to that meeting.
So I guess I would feel comfortable as, or would ask that we set that we would want to do so in August. And then the timeline for the other pieces we've talked about tonight, we'll just have to pan out between now and then.
Do you guys need anything else from us tonight on that? Is that enough direction to move forward with? I think there's some items that would be good to hear back on, like next meeting, if possible.
So we can't come back to you next meeting with this. Brady's going to be out of town for a little while. So I think the soonest we could come back to you on some of these projections is May 7th.
That's fine.
And I think at that time we will also come back to you with assuming an August ballot vote, backing out from that deadline, necessity resolution votes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Is that good?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work and time really, we don't say this probably enough, great job in following up and addressing the questions that were asked.
Thanks for asking.
In a thoughtful way. Thank you.
No,
Thanks for all that time and work. We appreciate it. Okay. Item N, approval loan fund balance. Oh my gosh, now I'm at work. Fund balance allocation, cloud and exchange server solution.
So this is a conversation that has is going back to last summer when you allocated FY16 fund balance and we talked about the need to update some of our technology solutions. So since then we have done some work with our existing IT vendor and our leadership team to really identify the goals we were looking for and put a recommendation into place. So just for context or history, we have two pretty outdated systems. We have a server here at City Hall that serves only non-public safety. City Hall files public safety because of their security requirements has a completely separate system. So we have one server here that's aging and that we need to either replace or find another solution for. And then as you all know, we use the free Gmail business accounts. So we have two challenges in front of us. One, we need to do something with that server. Two, we have maxed out our email accounts, so we are making staffing decisions based on who needs email and who doesn't, which is in modern day and age not a great way to function. So with our IT vendor, we have identified a cloud solution. So we would undo the on-site servers. We would move all of our data storage to a cloud solution. This presents huge opportunities actually for staff. Right now, for example, John Rauscher and Ryan can't share files. Ryan sits at Public Works and John is here, so they're emailing back and forth documents as opposed to being able to work off the same documents. It also would allow us to be at our computers anywhere where we have internet access. So if we were at a partner's office or it was a snow day and we were working from home, we could function just as if we were in City Hall. So it solves that problem. SimQuest, our IT vendor, also hosts an Exchange server in the cloud. So we could move to an email Exchange server and have unlimited emails as long as we were paying the user amount a month. So we think this solution meets all of those leadership goals. What we're asking for tonight is approval to use $28,849 of FY17 fund balance to fund the one-time migration costs of migrating all of our data that's currently on the server to the cloud and migrating everything we currently have either in Google Docs or in our email account to either our server or our email solution in the cloud. We have budgeted into the FY19 budget the annual maintenance costs associated with this solution. You will see in the memo presented that we are proposing a migrated solution in the future. So what we have budgeted for FY19 and are proposing now covers everybody who currently is on our system. For FY20, we're recommending basically bringing in all of our part-time firefighters, and then in FY21, bringing in all of our public safety officers, police and dispatch, assuming dispatch is still with us. So that would be an increase in future years, but we can cover current costs with what is budgeted. So the $28,000, $29,000 is really those one-time migration costs. And if you decide to allocate those dollars tonight, we'll still have a $367,000 balance in our FY17 fund balance account that we can decide over the next months how to use.
Great. This is one that we've actually been talking about for about 8 years now in terms of something that's been sorely needed. So it's been a running conversation for a while. And we've actually declined spending the money a couple times because of some tight budgets. Fund balance is leftover money from the previous year, right? We haven't had that discussion really other than here. And so it's an opportunity in a lot of cases to spend on one-time expense things that doesn't build structural deficit into the budget for the next year. So that's what Jesse took care to address the ongoing operational expense.
I have a historic question. So I am all about moving to the cloud. You should absolutely do that. This migration fee looks fine to me. Were there competitive bids though against SimQuest? Because the monthly cost there seems high to me.
We bid this service, I'm looking for Angela, she's not here, bid this service in 2015 or 16 for SimQuest. And because we have the existing contract with them, we look to them for the cloud solution. As we rebid their work annually, we will now then be rebidding a cloud solution.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Other questions, concerns, comments? Helps you guys do your jobs better, makes this a more lean operation, and gives you some expanded flexibility.
That's email addresses for staff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that needed today? Any questions, concerns from council? Any questions or concerns from the public?
So I will note just one final paragraph here. So if we move forward tonight, we think we can, SimQuest has indicated that they can do this before the end of the year. We will have about a 36-hour window where they do the final testing over a weekend, so we will be down for a weekend.
Any comments, questions from council? Seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the allocation of fund balance for the cloud exchange service solution presented this evening. So moved.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Nicole. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you all.
Discussion local emergency operations plan.
Hi, Chief.
2 minutes or less.
So this is, I'm gonna maybe steal John's thunder here. So we come to you every year for the approval of this. It's required that you approve our local emergency operations plan. What you have before you is a state required template. There's actually, this is the extended template that we think has more, brings more assets with it. There is a 4-page template we could have provided that would have been simpler, but not given us the depth we need to really manage emergencies. So it's on as a discussion item. Happy to answer questions about it. Once it's approved and submitted to the state, we also do intend to do a series of tabletop exercises with our staff to make sure everyone's kind of trained up in how we manage emergency situations.
Very well put.
Are there any changes this year over last year that you want to call out?
The format is much different. Last year was a 5-page document, and this longer version allows us to create a workflow.
Just more detail?
More detail.
But operationally speaking, are there changes?
Nope.
I think the communications piece is a big change with hiring a communications coordinator.
True.
He's put into place some very prescribed processes to issue nixles, press releases, emergency notifications, etc. And so John took those policies and embedded them in this.
So lots of pieces floating out, Nicole, I guess to kind of answer, the changes are we're taking a lot of pieces and putting it into one workflow.
The only specific one that I had is, I'm assuming we vetted the translation services especially. That's an issue that we've had discussions about previously against best practices for our region and available resources.
Yes, and those have been developed with our partners at ALV and VRP as well.
Direct communication plan.
And I'll just add in too is what you'll see every year is there's a larger regional hazard mitigation, disaster response plan that we're also part of. That's very comprehensive for the county because it's very rare that we're the only ones responding to any kind of emergency.
Yeah, so that's a 5-year plan, the all hazard. This is our local one that's annual.
Yeah.
So this will, as counselors change, as staff changes, this will constantly, it's a live document.
Right. Any questions for John in regards to what you read?
It was really good reading, right?
You did, it means you did a great job and everything's really clear.
Riveting.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns from the public? Okay, so seeing and hearing none. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your work on it. I think it's an important thing. And of course, again, people rarely get excited about our emergency response plans and things like that until they really need them to work and function. So thank you for all your work there.
This makes our lives a lot easier.
Yeah, I think it's great that you moved to a greater level of detail so that it's actually a useful tool for staff.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, up next is City Council Liaison Assignments. What we've all been waiting for, more stuff to do. So as we've kind of described and talked through with this body a number of times, each year liaisons are selected for, or are volunteered for in most cases, for commissions. And I'll say strategic vision areas is really the way we're trying to start really thinking about things. So we've got the Community Service Commission, Public Safety, Public Works, available in terms of counselors. Planning Commission is mayor by charter, and then by default I've been at Housing. I'm going to recommend, given the interest from this group here, that we think about having another counselor come to that, because I think it would be really helpful to see what those are. The thing I would warn against is it gets a little uncomfortable if there's more than 2 counselors or me and a counselor in a room. It doesn't violate open meeting laws. That's a real misnomer just because we're all at the same meeting if we're not directly engaged in policy, but it becomes difficult to separate and not ideal. So I would recommend that if somebody's really interested in that they express that this evening too.
When does the Housing Commission meet?
The Mondays that we don't, last Monday of the month,
The last Monday of the month?
yes.
Fourth Monday.
Oh, good,
Fourth Monday of the month.
good point. You could have a 5 Monday. That's why I missed that one.
And then there's the administration liaison. Did you say that?
I did not get there yet. I
Okay,
was
sorry.
seeing that I missed that. Going to the next page, you're right. Yes, absolutely. And then we've also, beyond that, we've got the downtown Winooski, by charter, has a city council member liaison, and the Coalition for a Safe and Peaceful Community, which is actually now, as we heard from their update, the Partnership for Change, also in their charter.
Partnership for Prevention.
Partnership for Prevention. You should.
I'm changed.
Sorry about that.
What?
Yeah. My fault. And Mayor's Coalition, RPC. We're going to have a conversation about the alternate at the RPC, and we're not going to do that tonight. That's a coming attraction. So I want to open it up and see if folks have had time to think about what their areas are. You know, what we've said in the past is it's really good for people to move around from time to time. And I don't know if you've moved, want to speak to the value of that, or anything either of you want to add from your experiences?
Yeah, so before I became a counselor, I was on the Community Services Commission, and then I did 2 years, I think, public safety, and then 1 year as liaison to administration, and definitely find it to be very useful in terms of better understanding the work of the department and the perspectives of community members on specific issues within that department. I'm not sure how I feel about every year changing, because I do think there's a learning curve associated with taking on a new department, and some commissions, I think, do more than others. Just in terms of the meat of the agenda.
Have more active periods of time.
Have more active periods.
They all do the same.
So I think it is a useful role that we play to serve as a liaison to those commissions, and I don't know that it necessarily has to be an area of interest, but that helps too.
Yeah, I don't know. And the only thing we try to clarify in this, let's all do this the same way. Sit at the table. Feel free to engage in conversation, discussion. You're not voting. And just try to be respectful of the fact that this is their opportunity to help shape policy. It's not our job to come in with the policy and say, here's what we want you to, here's the outcome we want you to reach. Now make sure you get there. That's not the way that process works. And the one exception to that will be, I am still not going to sit with the Planning Commission because they have a different state authority. Do you have something?
So just to add to that, I do, as leadership team was talking about these commissions and the new council and appointments, I think one of the things that would be helpful for us moving forward is that the staff liaison, each commission has a staff member appointed, and the council liaison do work hand in hand in ensuring that the policy extension arms, the commissions, are doing the work the council wants to see, and that are not necessarily are bringing back a specific policy, but are bringing back recommendations and data for you all that you believe your body wants to see. I think sometimes we as staff feel put in the position of having to be your spokespeople, and it would be, which is fine, and our job is to implement your vision, but it would be helpful if the council liaisons can help help carry that mantle of what the council is looking for from the commissions.
It's a good point. It's a delicate balance.
Delicate balance.
Yeah, I think that we could be more intentional in what the process by which we send things to commission. I think it would be helpful for us to think about that when we do our retreat.
I think we've made some improvements on that in the last year at the recommendation of the group last year. I thought that was really good feedback, and I think we've tried to be, but have leaps and bounds yet to go. So it's a really good point of things for our retreat. All right, so let's open it up. Who's interested in what?
Well,
Let's put it on the table.
I just, having been elected, came off of the Community Service Commission, so it just seems natural that I would continue, as I've only been on for less than 2 years, to be the liaison for that.
Going once? Going twice? I think your voice is a really valuable asset there, and I would agree that having not spent a ton of, a long distance on there, that you've got to start at being really effective, and that makes a lot of sense.
Ray's cheering in the background. Staff is gonna start.
You would have cheered with any one of these amazing people. So then I would, the hard part for you is Nicole switched last year, and you're 1 year into administration.
Yeah.
You came on last year. You're 1 year into public safety. How do you feel about infrastructure and public works, Christine?
I'm actually interested in that.
Yeah. As our new communications person for the Main Street revitalization project.
That's
Seems like a good fit.
That's great.
I would like to go to Housing Commission. I think I probably should, given my interest in the topic. And that Mondays are workable for me from a scheduling. That's always been a challenge for me.
They also, they're 6:30ers, aren't they? Are they 6:30s or 6?
There's 6 until 8.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I lied.
Generally doable.
I'd be interested in adding, being the liaison to downtown Winooski if nobody else is especially interested in it.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else clamoring for that one? Okay.
Eric can have it.
So we'll have that conversation. Doesn't have to be this way. In a lot of cases in the past, the person who, because of the focuses of what was formerly the Winooski Coalition for a Safe, Peaceful Community, is now the Partnership for Prevention, there has tended to be a crossover with community services. In a lot of cases, the person who did that liaisonship would also be their board liaison.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Are you comfortable with that? I believe that they meet once a month or once every other month even. It might be once every other month now. It's actually an organized board though with
okay.
Yeah, which wasn't always the case in the past.
I have to admit that the fourth Monday this month I'm on vacation. it's April vacation week. So please don't take it as a sign of my lack of commitment.
So would I be contacted by them?
We'll take care of that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we'll take care of that. That's great. And then we'll come back to everybody. There is one item on here I want to point out that we've had some strategic conversations about. Number one, I'm going to bring back Regional Planning Commission alternate. We need to grow some folks on our planning commission, and I think we've got a couple people who have expressed some interest in that, so we've just got to work through that. I haven't talked to staff a lot about that. We are having conversations on the Green Mountain Transit Board piece. That board position has been for some odd reason, the transportation entity in the state thinks it's a good idea to hold their meetings all over different locations, and I'm voicing frustration publicly that I voiced to them. At 10 a.m. in the morning, in the middle of people's workdays. So we have had a rotating cast of people volunteer and not be able to keep up with that because they have jobs and responsibilities. And because of some of the operational nature of it, we've had a discussion about appointing a staff member potentially for that, and wanting everybody to know that that could be a proposal that comes up. I think it's fair if you want to say, hey, try to find a staff member who's also a resident. That would be a good, thing. From a user perspective to have, and then have the alternate be a resident who we are keeping in check and having that. So if there is no concern with that, we'll probably keep pursuing that conversation generally, but there's some interviews coming up. Anybody have an issue with that? It's an important board and one that we suffer when there's not a perspective on there. Questions, concerns, comments from the public?
So did I miss it that Nicole, you're gonna stay with me and do the housing?
I'm gonna stay with you and do housing.
Okay.
So she is, but from a formal perspective, because it's a planning commission,
just
I stay on,
Yep.
and so she's got like, I don't know, an informal secondary liaison or alternate to the housing commission. How about that? And then we're gonna bring on a planning commission alternate too, so we'll have all kinds of alternates and liaisons. That will be a well-guided group. Questions, concerns, comments? Really wish somebody would take the Mayor's Coalition in sound. Okay. So, okay, so we actually have it's on as a discussion. If we could just put that listing formally into the consent agenda next time, that'd be great. Thank you.
So I will do that, but in the meantime, since there are meetings next week, we will inform kind of the new liaisons before the appointment time.
We'll do intros for you to Kelsey and everyone and Brian, and then we'll do intros to Kate and everybody for you for those subgroups.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you all. It's a great opportunity. Hope you enjoy it. If you've got questions, the other thing that I usually ask is if you're not able to make a meeting, it's important for our perspective to be there. If you could please let me know. I'll generally try to sweep in. So I've covered a couple in the last few months, for example, where counselors couldn't make it.
Okay.
So I'll pop in. I got nothing better to do. Just teasing. Okay. Item Q. City Council F-35 potential action and consideration of a resolution. So I put together this document and shared with you the link to the past statements by the City Council. So this is an item that we've talked about quite a bit, so I think I'm just going to step right aside and see if there's a sense. We've got, a resolution that was passed in Burlington that's going to be up for consideration on the 16th. What we've had some residents express interest in seeing us do is putting forward a supported resolution to that. And I think what I tried to put in here in one of I guess it's option number 2 is what it's now being called out in the world, is there are some 3 points that we could write up very easily. I wouldn't need a lot of guidance from you on putting together language on that to bring a resolution back next Monday that could be supportive of that. So, what this document outlines is we could do nothing. We've said a lot about the issue, and just rest on that. We could formally request that Burlington, South Burlington, and other interest communities submit a joint resolution there for us. We could make that. I would want your consent to do it before really diving into those conversations, because then it's going to be negotiational language that you won't see till it gets churned out. And then the other option is the supported resolution. And I guess the fourth option that I thought I put on here, but I apparently probably deleted it at some point, is, you could go head in and reopen the whole issue and have research and study and legal work done and use bandwidth that we don't really have right now on staff. So that's an option though, that you could consider. So thoughts, concerns?
I'd like to submit a supporting resolution along with Burlington.
Okay. What do you think of those content points? Is there anything you would change or feel like needs to be?
So that would be the bullet 2? Would that be the? Yeah. I support that.
Me too.
Yeah, I think we've said it well in the past, and we can say it again with the content you've outlined. I don't feel like my position has changed based on our previous discussions, so the previous resolutions we've passed,
I think that the only thing that's missing in the sub-bullet points is, wouldn't we be making a statement to the effect of like, Burlington put forward this resolution with this language, like we support that. Also, we support the guard, here's our past statements, etc.
Yeah, I think it would be it'd be me too. It'd be Burlington's asking you for something that we've actually previously asked you for.
Yeah.
So as a community, we're taking this opportunity to point back and say, we've also asked you for that. So we hope that you will consider, given the land, just to be blunt, South Burlington's talking about the same thing tonight. And I would venture to guess we'll probably move something similar. We'll see, but so it'll reference those things.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I jump in? I'm Fiona, I called all of you today.
Oh.
Thank you.
And I've been working a lot with the Save Our Skies group, so I think the concern is that the Burlington resolution language is a little bit tempered, maybe is a good way to put it. So they didn't use the exact language that was on the ballot. They request an alternate mission, but they're not requesting a cancellation of the basing. So what we would be hoping for from Winooski would be a little bit just clearer resolution that is really clear that we want to cancel the basing and we request instead low noise level equipment. I know one of our group members has created his own resolution that I think we will review tomorrow within our group and maybe pass along to staff just for your review. And what he created is quite long and just kind of reviews a lot of the concerns and the data and the history of what this council has already put forth. So it might be handy and all be laid out there for you, or you might not want that and want to just come up with your own language. But I think just a really clear statement saying we don't think this is good for our community and we're really concerned about the health and safety effects of these planes and we want some things different.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's just a couple items on it. The resolution that was submitted, with all due respect to the author, has some, what I would say, challenging to substantiate items in there that we want to, that I know I would, trying to put it into a draft form on the timeline that we're on might be challenging, but we will ensure that everybody's had an opportunity to see that in that language and be sure that it's shared. I'd asked him to share, I'm assuming it's Jimmy you're talking about, but it's in, I'd asked him to go ahead and share that with the full council too, if they haven't. I'll check with them to see if they haven't, if they do have it to see it.
The super long ones, I know he had submitted one a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
He made another one.
Okay.
So I don't know which version you have. I had the impression from him he wanted us to review it first, so my hope would be that it would be reviewed and be more ironclad before it comes to you.
And the crux of our previous resolutions that we'd be pointing to, the final statements, the therefores have been, we're requesting that the airport be removed from this round of basing, and our questions and concerns have not been addressed or answered substantially. So if we're doing the revert back to those items, they say a number of other things and raise individual concerns, but those are really the central therefores. So that would be what that language would probably look like. Thank you. Thanks for your time and advocacy on this show.
Yeah, I just have one question about, because I think you have, that you would send the resolution to the Air Force, and then, but the third bullet point there is reiterate to the congressional delegation their responsibility to ensure as many tools as possible are available for mitigation of any impact. So would it be sort of CCing the congressional delegation in the resolution? Or?
So in the last resolution we passed, we actually singled them out and said, you have been supportive of this initiative, and as such, we entrust that you've also signed yourself up for the responsibility of pursuing any kind of offsetting, any impact offsetting measures that are available, be that through the FAA or other means. And that was important because we didn't want to just limit the scope to saying, well, go to the FAA. That there be a commitment there to take concrete steps, which to my knowledge we have not heard from them. So that's what was the previous kind of tone around that was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think a whole other tack would be an additional resolution to the congressional delegation. I'm sure you've been, that's been talked about as well.
Yeah.
Not necessarily regarding mitigation, but just regarding canceling the basing.
Yeah.
They may have the authority to do that.
Yeah.
In the dream world.
Great. Thank you. Other questions or concerns? So I'm hearing marching orders to come back with a resolution that hits those bullet points and reflects that. Okay, that's you bet. All right, next up this evening, we have discussion of resolution opposing inclusion of a citizenship question of the 2020 census. This was actually a resolution with language submitted by Councilor Covey, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Yeah, I think the resolution is pretty self-explanatory, and so I think what I'll do is rather than just belabor and drone on like I usually do, I'll just do what Seth does when he has a resolution and read it, and then if folks have questions, we can dive in. Does that work?
Please.
So, whereas the U.S. Constitution requires the census every 10 years to count each and every persons in the country, regardless of age, race, gender, ethnicity, or citizenship status. Whereas the vital data collected by the census is used to determine important functions of our democracy, such as the drawing of legislative districts, congressional seat assignments, and electoral college makeup, in addition to how federal funding allocation decisions are made and how local and state government makes important policy determinations. Whereas accurate population data is crucial in ensuring that these important decisions are made appropriately. Whereas Winooski is the most diverse community in Vermont, home to many new American and immigrant community members. Whereas Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross announced that he is directing the Census Bureau to ask all respondents to the 2020 census to report their citizenship status. Whereas a heightened fear caused by recent increases in civil immigration enforcement and deportation activities has created an environment of distrust and a decline in participation or interaction with government services for many. Whereas inclusion of a citizenship question on the 2020 census is likely to severely depress participation, leading to inaccurate total population counts. Whereas Winooski is the recipient of federal and state funding determined by population data, and inaccurate population counts could have significant harmful impacts to Winooski residents through potential threats to future funding. Whereas Winooski and state of Vermont policymakers and government employees are reliant on accurate population counts and census data to inform local and state policy decisions that have significant impacts on the lives of community members. Therefore, be it resolved that the Winooski City Council requests that 1. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and the Commerce Department modify their position and direct the Census Bureau not to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census. 2. Congress passed legislation to override the Commerce Department's decision to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census, using its basic authority under the Constitution. 3. The President and administration officials commit publicly to uphold the Census Act's basic privacy and confidentiality protections, including instructing federal agencies not to request from the Census Bureau or use personal information collected by the Census Bureau for their own operations.
Questions, concerns, comments from council?
So who would this be submitted to?
Any folks named in the action items. And I don't know the proper channels. We can figure that out.
POTUS at us.gu. So what I'll say too is, and I'm not speaking out of school in regards to this specific resolution.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, in a lot of cases, we have not taken up resolutions like this under practice. It's a newly comprised body. And I think it's important for people to have an opportunity to kind of figure that out as a group in a body. I think this is an important issue personally. So I'm not reflecting on the issue in any way, shape, or form. But just in case that was a road you're interested in going down, I think there's going to be time and space for that conversation, especially when we get to the strategic body about what kinds of statements you guys want to see come forward on what issues and what. I think that's something that we've got to figure out and fill out, because I knew where the last council stood on it. That wasn't confusing. This is a new body. And it's a new day, and we want to be respectful and responsible about what various interests are, especially in the beginning. And then we'll all kind of hit a groove, hopefully. That make sense?
Yeah, I mean, my general bias is not to make political statements, and so some of this feels political by like calling out specific individuals and government actors. But you know, we've also got this F-35 stuff that we've done, and we've directed that to the Air Force. So I guess we don't have but that's not been tied to a specific administration. That's been tied to multiple administrations have been
That's where we have
working towards this.
formal standing in a process that unfolded.
Right.
That we're making continuous conversations on,
Right,
so
where the
that's,
community has weighed in pretty
I would argue that is different.
clearly in terms of the direct impact on the community and its interest in making statements. So, I guess I would not want to, I understand and share your feelings about the developments with respect to the census and the potential impact that that could have on the community. And at the same time, I'm reluctant to get into a pattern of every time something outrageous happens in Washington, we pass a resolution.
I definitely agree with the end of that. I don't feel like this is as grounded in making a political statement as it is a functional need, and how negative of an impact when it comes to potential federal funding this would have on our community. And so I guess to me, specific individuals have taken specific action, and so that's why those specific individuals are called out.
Right.
But I don't have any interest in, nor do I think this body should make statements for the purpose of making them, unless they have a significant impact on our community members, which I feel really strongly that this does, and a very harmful one too.
So what, and I apologize, I'm not trying to shorten, but let's have that sort of larger conversation about that temperature thing. I think I would like that to be on our strategy session a little bit, for at least a small portion of that time. Got a lot of functional stuff on there. Let's have an emotional chat too. It's not too late to smile, guys. Specific to this resolution and content, questions, comments, concerns?
I like the clarity of it, and I think it's on point given our demographics and the severity that it will rain down on our community if it's carried forth. And there's a number of other communities pushing back, and I'd like to join that.
I'll just add one of the things that isn't in there, I think is so important. It's not just about federal funding, but like we are reliant on this data to do this role effectively. Like we were just talking about housing goals, and so much of our data is built on census data. So for us to be able to do that work in an intelligent and direct way.
I see all the value in that and worry about that too. But for me, I question the actual outcome that we could get out of this. Like, will this actually do any good for us? And I also feel like it leans towards this political statement that maybe could alienate some of our community even towards no real end. Like, are we getting value out of putting this out there? What I question.
What political statements being made?
I feel like this has a anti-conservative slant to it. I agree with these points. Like, I think that adding that question to the census is going to reduce participation and very critical data. But I don't see the value in putting this out there if we're not going to get, like, doing these. I guess this is back to like the broader strategy or the broader discussion. Like, it feels to me like there's not, making this effort doesn't get us anything.
So I also disagree there, and I think to one of the points Hal was making, there are a lot of communities that are standing up, and I think our municipalities play an incredibly important role in shaping policy directions from the local level to the state level to the national level, and our voice is really, really important in advocating for our interests as a community. And so we might be small, it might not have a lot of individual impact, but to lend our voice to a larger conversation that is going on, I do think has value.
I've got a long opinion about the efficacy of things like this, and I'm happy to share it. I think that's a different strategy conversation I'd like to have kind of down the road a little bit and try to wrap this specific resolution up. And I'm not trying to just quell conversation. If there's additional conversation or debate on it, that would just be my recommendation this evening. Because I think that's a really large sort of what do we want our body to work on, what do we want our voice to be, and what do we want to focus our time and energy on conversation. And that's part of the strategy. That's what we do strategy for.
So my preference would be to eliminate references to individuals and the president and just have a statement about the importance of a objective census process that does not include questions such as this one that seem to be designed to reduce. So I think a lot of the whereases are great. I just want to depersonalize it a little bit and be more focused on the value that this data provides to the community and the importance that our residents feel safe completing.
I guess then that I would feel like we're farther reducing efficacy, because if we're not calling for a specific action, then it's just a bunch of pretty words.
I'm good at that. And a lot of our resolutions are that.
Okay. So, so a recommendation has been made for amendment to generalize therefore statement. Is there interest in drafting something out like that on the original one, or would you like to see action on it as presented?
Well, would people feel more comfortable? So, item 3 of the therefores, really, it's asking for a public affirmation. It's against the law for any federal department to use personal information collected by the census, or to even have access to it. They can only have access to the aggregate depersonalized data. So really, in essence, it's already against the law for item 3 to happen. And if people are uncomfortable with item 3, I think items 1 and 2 are the important part in ensuring that the census question is not asked. So I'd be fine with accepting a friendly amendment to strip out item 3 and move forward with the resolution with the items 1 and 2 as therefore.
Counter offer. You want to see generalized language? Is that what you're looking for? That removes any request for various claims?
Just a point of view.
But I think it's the same as asking our congressional delegation in regards to sound mitigation. But they're the people with the power to make a specific decision point, as are.
I understand. The point is this is why we don't and have not in the past taken up things like this, is because it's asking all of us to adopt very specific language and makes it very challenging. So again, I want to go back. Is there a motion? Well, I'll tell you what. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go one more round. Any comments, questions, concerns from council on the resolution? Any comments, questions, concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion on the resolution.
Discussion.
I'm sorry? Oh, it's on as discussion. It's not even on as an, okay. So then I'll ask, are there any final points of recommendation to the author for changes to be made for it to come back for approval? I'm hearing generalized language. So it sounds like that might be a path. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay, we'll now move on to executive session. We have on the agenda tonight executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313(1)B, labor relation agreements with employees and specifically the Fraternal Order of the Peace, or FOP. This is in regards to contract negotiations that conduct in public would put the city at a strategic disadvantage and is also a personnel matter and not fitting for public consumption as well. Council will not take any action in executive session. It will be discussion only, and that concludes tonight's business. The council as a body will reconvene only to adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you very much. What's that?
Motion
Oh.
I move.
Could I please, I would entertain a motion to enter an executive session, bringing with us Jesse Baker. Anybody else, Jesse?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Nicole, second by Christine. Any further discussion? Seeing here none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Seeing